It's a tale as old as time. George Harrison hated Paul McCartney, and Paul McCartney deserved it. But what if he didn't? And what if he didn't?
What would you say to John or to George if they were here today?
I would say I love you.
And they said, well, there's some people down here who are trying to get this rumor started about you and Paul.
Who was that? Was that you? Yeah, all right. Keep it in.
On the 10th of January, 1969, after an argument with Paul McCartney, George Harrison leaves the Beatles, goes home, and writes Wah Wah. In May 1970, the Let It Be documentary puts the tension on display and fully solidifies the Beatles' breakup and simultaneously rocks the public's faith in the Fab Four narrative. Did they ever even like each other? Rumors of a physical fight, legal troubles, conflicting album releases, songs and interviews come and go. Interest surrounds John and Paul, but confusion follows Paul and George. If they ever did like each other, they surely didn't by January 1969.
But actually, I love Paul, he's my mate, and it doesn't matter what they say in the papers.
Hello, George.
Nice to see you.
He's a lovely man. I love him dearly. I grew up with him, and I like to remember all the great times we had together in Liverpool and with the Beatles, and ever since, really.
Hi, I'm Lars, and this is my land. In my land, I get to do pretty much whatever I want. So today, I'm going to dig into a tiny glimpse of the friendship between Paul McCartney and George Harrison through the lens of a song breakdown of Wah Wah. And you're going to listen because it's my land. Welcome to Annoying Memos Land. Beepity beep, beepity beep, beep. Whoop. Okay, whatever. So if you're new here, I just waste 11 years of journalism experience and the awards I won doing that by making long videos on the Beatles. And I've also made a 7-hour video on Lost. If I don't mention it in every video I do, I will be forced to walk at 4 miles an hour until I die.
That's right. Just keep walking. Yeah, that's it, kid, that's it.
So I have to. Please like, subscribe, comment if you're nasty. It helps so much more than you think it does. And if you want to support me, get all the music, a lot of other stuff, watching documentaries, full interviews, lots of insanity, get your gold passport at my Patreon, patreon.com/LarsLand. But if not, like, subscribe, comment if you're nasty. Now let's go back to my land. Shout out to Abigail DeVoe for help with this video title. I was having a hard time with it, and yes, we're all friends and we all talk about you. I'm just kidding. Well, but we are all friends.
Been here.
I think your beard suits you, man.
All the love in the world is useless when there is a total lack of understanding. Kafka. Here's the roadmap. I'm going to go through the point of no return, that moment, at least the moment that we see that George Harrison winds up leaving the Beatles. I'll talk about what he does that night, writing Wah Wah, and then we'll get into production, the typical song breakdown stuff. We'll listen to the song, at least within Content Daddy's guidelines, and I'll get you out of here early. How's it sound? So to be clear, this is not a Get Back breakdown, but it kind of became that to a degree. There's so much background of this situation that happened over the Get Back/Let It Be filming that I'm going to be spending a lot of time there. So it's not intentionally a Get Back breakdown, but it kind of turned into that. Similarly to my White Album project, I can be pretty harsh at times during this video. This doesn't mean that I don't love the Beatles themselves. I love the Beatles so much, okay? This is not coming from a point of judgment ever. This is coming from the perspective of a fact-finding mission and just not pulling punches. I don't mince words, and frankly, during this, neither did they. This is pure data.
Is that bad?
I am raw intellect. Your moral weight has no effect on me. Pure data!
That in spite of my last video being about ethical research and trying to combat bias, this is so embarrassing. While I am pulling from research and readings and I am being as like thorough as possible, this is one of the rantiest, rambliest, insert bias bullshit videos I have made in well over a year. Except for like the Midas Man video, which everybody hates, but I'm keeping it up because everybody hates it. So see, still rambling here, rambling. So if rambling is not your cup of tea, maybe isn't the video for you. I just wanted to say that I don't think I know everything about the Beatles. I don't. If you're kind of like, Jesus, who the does this person think they are? Fair. Just ignore this video. Come back next time when I do better. Love you. Sourcing is extremely important. So whenever I'm doing a reading or quoting someone, that will also be written on screen along with the quote. The sources that I am using for this project are on screen. However, these are not all of the sources that I dug into for the research for this project. These are just the ones that wind up in the project. Of course, all of my sources are always listed in the descriptions, and when I can, I add a link to where they can be accessible. There will be parts of quotes that are cut where it's like I read part of it, then skip, and then put part of it, but the whole quote will always be on screen. Source of where I got it will be on screen. The Though We May Be Parted website, Dan Rivkin, for some reason this is always incorrect in my brain, but this blog by Dan Rivkin is called They May Be Parted. TheyMayBeParted.com is a journalist like me who is extremely thorough, like me, and he has done everything when it comes to Get Back, Nagra, Let It Be. His website, y'all, if you give a shit about this era of the Beatles at all, if you're curious at all, you will go check him out. I mean, the times that I've thought about doing a Get Back video, I'm like, what would be the point? It'll never be as good as him. He is the definitive guy. That's a real journalist there.
In fact, he was, I think, about 1.5 years younger than me. That's quite a big age difference at that time. So to talk down to him a little bit, as you do to a sort of kid who's 1.5 years younger than you.
He was always 9 months older than I. Even now, he's still 9 months older than I.
For something I think about so much, this relationship between George and Paul, I sure have a hard time vocalizing my thoughts. The point of no return is something that came from a pattern. Again, a festering wound. We haven't given him any bandages. A long-standing joke is Paul saying that George was the baby, a couple years younger than he and John. George is a couple years younger than John and Ringo. He's 8 months younger than Paul. In an interview, George says, "I'm 8 months younger than Paul. I've always been 8 months younger than Paul," or he says a year, something like that. I can't remember. It's funny. It's a funny joke, but it is annoying, and it says a lot. And while Paul does establish over and over that any age gap during that time and those formative years was significant to him, the age gap between John and Paul was never an issue like this. It was only an issue with George. George, the baby, the guitarist. George doesn't write songs. It took a few good years until George started writing songs, and he can shit on Don't Bother Me all he wants, but I love that song. I named my fish Beethoven the Bother after that song.
Stop trying to fight yourself. It's literally a suction cup.
That song is perfect for the time. And also, I prefer his version of Roll Over Beethoven to any other version. Don't at me.
I just want to pause here and say that I am not ridiculing any specific artists. Do not assassinate me.
He was easily relegated to the back of the room, a far second place to the neck and neck John and Paul. George Martin later expressed regret for dismissing George's talents for so long. It took a long time for George Harrison to believe in himself. With John's acid tongue and Paul's put-downs and controlling actions, there's good reason that George Harrison wouldn't have believed in himself. The same dynamic was not present for Ringo. Ringo's older, he came in later, he intimidated the group to begin with, he didn't write songs, and he wasn't really ever put down until he was, but we covered that in the White Album video, which I'll talk about several times during this. Just get ready for me to plug my second favorite video of all time. Okay? Deal with it. George threw himself into spirituality and found his creativity there. His musical taste moved into Indian influences. Paul was searching for himself in the art scene, and his musical tastes were competitive and commercial. Paul was writing hits. George was writing lessons. And they didn't agree often. When they did see eye to eye, it was on what they thought sounded good. Patty said in her book that she didn't believe Paul and George ever really loved each other. But Olivia talks about how Paul would come over and those two would walk the grounds arm in arm and talk for hours. The last public appearance George and Olivia had was with Paul and Heather Mills. I think that they were at the circus or Cirque du Soleil, something like that. I don't remember. I'll put it on screen. You could not get me to believe that they did not love each other. It is important to state that a lot of water has gone under the bridge, and that as we talk now, everybody's good friends and we have a better understanding of the past, but talking about what was happening at that time, you can see it was strange. I change my mind so much. I learn too much. I have to take in new information. I read too much. I said something in my last video that I was like, I think that and I've already changed my mind about that. And I'm not going to explain it right now because it would take too long. And we obviously don't have enough time for me to keep going into, you could not get me to change my mind on this. I will always believe that they loved each other. This relationship was by far the most complex of the Beatles. John and Paul was the most contentious, the most up and down. But George and Paul was the most complex, the most confusing. And even still, I love you, but I don't always like you. It's a mantra I return to a lot during these deep dives. A feeling that I have toward the Beatles as people, but never toward their music. And definitely a mantra that I see for George and Paul. I hear too often that George hated Paul. He said a lot of snarky stuff well into the 80s about Paul. And I just don't think it's that simple. George held a grudge. This very spiritual man viewed certain things, his spiritual endeavors, very positively. And he viewed other things, oftentimes the Beatles, very negatively. I don't think that they weigh the same, but he talks about them like they do. And I still don't think I'm vocalizing this well enough.
Microbiotic pills, you're arriving at the right. The wind can blow those clouds.
This also isn't an All Things Must Pass album review, though the more I'm working on this, the more I'm thinking I probably should do one. But it is kind of a bleak glimpse into how George was feeling at the time. It was when Apple was getting crazy. Ringo wanted it blue, John wanted it white, Paul wanted it green, and I wanted it orange. Paul was falling out with us all, going around Apple offices saying you're no good. Everybody was just incompetent. It was that period, the problem of partnerships. No one around you will carry the blame for you. No one around you will love you today and throw it all away. Tomorrow when you rise, another day for you to realize me or send me down again. As the days stand up on end, you've got me wondering how I lost your friendship, but I see it in your eyes. Though I'm beside you, I can't carry the blame for you. I may decide to get out with your blessing. We're all carry on guessing. Paul once reminded me, don't forget, you're not very good, any of you. You know that, don't you? I had forgotten. I had. It had gotten to the point where I was really believing in myself, really having a good time being me. Being was sticking your neck out and getting bites all over it. I don't think I ever hated anyone as much as I hated Paul in the summer of 1968. That's Derek Taylor, the Beatles press officer, conveying in 2 paragraphs what it was like to live in the vicinity of Paul McCartney in the latter years of the Beatles. And in 1968, the same year, Paul says, you see, I went through a big part of my life without realizing that I had any faults. Then about 2 years ago, I said to myself, come on, Paul, you're not that great. Only a couple years later, Paul would go through such a deep depression that he was drinking himself into a stupor every single day, unable to get out of bed in spite of having a newborn baby, and probably was only able to pull himself out of that because he didn't pull himself out of that. Linda McCartney did it for him. Thank you, Linda. So we're about to talk about Get Back, but just wanted to say that even going into the Get Back / Let It Be kerfuffle, as it were, in this style is pretty misleading. Focusing on solely the filmed and publicized fight between George and Paul is leaving out a lot. 1, there's confusion / interest / resentment toward the live show. 2, they wanted to make these songs live. They want to be able to perform them live, which is something that they haven't made as part of their songs since before Revolver. Rubber Soul was the last time that they were really regularly making songs that they could replicate on stage. This is completely, at this point, out of their wheelhouse. They are so used to having overdubs, echo, double tracking on their side. They don't have it now. Simplifying the Beatles at this point, they're like almost out of their depth. It's the Beatles. They're not out of their depth. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean it like that. I meant like, right.
I still don't think you should be saying these words.
But within the context, they're perfectly innocent.
But that's not what people think when they hear them.
Oh, that's okay, Zach. You just have to explain yourself every single time you use them.
3, they don't really have songs prepped outside of like Maxwell's Silver Hammer, Polythene Pam, Mean Mr. Mustard. Like they had a couple songs, but songs that didn't even go on Let It Be. So outside of George's songs, which he had like hundreds, they were often discussing the need for a piano or organ, which they couldn't always swing with just 4 of them, which kind of goes back to the need to simplify. So they really did need a 5th Beatle. And also, the White Album Resentments are left over. It was, if I'm remembering correctly, I got this wrong. It was like 77, 78 days before they got into Twickenham, which is, I mean, it's just such a short time. And then not even 3 months. And then since the release, it was about 44 days. So it wasn't very much time at all. This stuff is still extremely fresh. There was like no time to breathe. Ringo went on holiday. Like they all kind of went on holiday. They took trips. John and Yoko like sat in a bag and did a couple things. And then they wound up back in Twickenham. They didn't have time to resolve their conflicts. Let's go to anthology. So now that I'm reading this, which I just decided to add, I'm going to add bits of anthology quotes in when I'm reading transcripts from the Get Back project. So it'll be on screen. You'll see me holding this book and you'll see me holding the Get Back book. So it should be like a little self-explanatory, but I'm sorry, that's confusing. I didn't add this in the script as an EBB. I fucked it up. This is kind of explaining what this project was. Paul says,
the original idea was that you'd see the Beatles rehearsing, jamming, making up stuff, getting their act together, and then finally we'd perform somewhere as the big end show concert kind of thing.
We started Let It Be in January 1969 at Twickenham Studios under the working title Get Back. Michael Lindsay-Hogg was the director. I remember I had an idea for the final scene, which would be a massive tracking shot forever and ever, and then we would be in the concert.
So that you can come down out of that roof on one long shot right from the back there and just come down on a thing, slowly, like a chair lift, right down, right into Ringo's face.
The original idea was to go on an ocean liner and get away from the... We don't really care about that. George says, I think the original idea was Paul to rehearse some new songs, pick a location, and record the album of the songs in a concert. We would learn the tunes and record them without loads of overdubs. Do a live album. Paul says, I don't think we were consciously going for live feeling in those sessions. I'd say that was probably true, but I don't remember being conscious of trying to make it live, which we see that not being true in Get Back. Here's what George Martin says. They were going through a revolutionary period at that time and were trying to think of something new. And they wanted a new engineer. They have Jeff Emmerich, so Glenn Johns came in. I guess they basically wanted a new producer, but they never actually said that to me, so I was still there. Yeah, I mean, they had Glenn, but George, they relied on him. Like, it's a whole thing. That's, Lars, this isn't a Get Back breakdown. Da-da-da-da-da. Okay, and then he says, but there was a lot of dissension and lack of steering. Really, they were rudderless at this time. They didn't like each other too much and were fighting amongst themselves. In the early days of Get Back, things are lighter in spite of some serious difficulties just a few months prior. The lightness is there. George is being kind and complimentary. The pair of them are focused on songs that they have prepared or are working on. Ringo starts out super strong but winds out getting super ill for this project. Slight adjustment to that, Ringo stays super strong throughout the whole thing in spite of being super ill for this project. And there are several mornings that John's showing up under the influence of heroin. So we're dealing with like taste the rainbow levels of commitment and interest here. John says, I wasn't consciously making any decisions. It was all sort of subconscious. And I just made records with the Beatles like one's goes to one's job at 9 a.m. Paul or whoever would say, it's time to make a record. And I just go in and make a record and not think too much about it. Always I've enjoyed the session if it was a good session. If we got our rocks off playing, it was fine. If it was a drag, it was a drag, but it had become a job. George is at a creative high and is now seeing his worth. He'd recently taken a trip to the US where everyone freaking loved. He was feeling good about himself. And that being said, Paul is still even trying to control the all things must pass rehearsals. And it seems as if George is making songs every night and he's still trying to reach out. He's saying it should feel as though we've all written these songs together. Like I've written your song, you've written my song.
Should be where if you write a song, I feel as though I wrote it, and vice versa. You know, I mean, you've got to be involved with it as much as if, you know. That was the good thing about the last album. It's the only album so far I tried to get involved with.
Yeah. And he also degrades his work by saying he's just another guitar and he's sometimes singing, and he goes on to compare himself to Eric Clapton, which I'm not. There are several little tiffs between George and Paul, and whenever George speaks up, Paul pushes back. It's not exactly tit for tat.
That's the only time that works, really, is on the last line.
Oh, forget the last line.
I'm just trying to get a bit, we'll try, you know, to sort of go right through and keep talking about it.
Okay, girls.
But George pushes back sometimes when Paul speaks up. I think of those early fights. I have the keys. Well, I have the wheel. Well, I have the keys. I have the wheel.
No, Paul had the keys and George was sitting behind the wheel as we came out. An argument went on for at least an hour and a half. I've got the keys. Well, I'm sitting behind the wheel. No one was going to give up. You know, I got the keys. I've got the wheel.
They're still young, really, and they're like emotionally stunted. So I read this thing from Marc Lewison. Yeah, I know, whatever. I kind of introduced this incorrectly, so I just wanted to clear this up. Marc Lewison says in one interview that essentially, if he doesn't write about the Beatles, it will be wrong forever because he's the only one trying to get it right.
I mean, it's very important that I write this book now because otherwise it'll be wrong forever. And the primary reason for me doing it is to ensure that it's right. Because this is a story that has immense beauty in it. And somehow or other that transmits still all these decades on, and I don't think that's ever going to stop. But what could happen is that if I don't write these books, it will be wrong forever. It'll be misunderstood forever. The myths will pertain. There are a lot of myths around the Beatles, hundreds, thousands of them. And it's only really me who's really out there trying to get it right.
What a disturbing thing to say. As a quote-unquote historian or a quote-unquote scholar, wouldn't you want the knowledge to grow? And then he intimates in another interview, a podcast, that essentially anyone who's younger couldn't write it because we don't understand the times.
I do have a concern that books now and in the future are being written by people who, it's not so much that they weren't there, it's that they can't have, and it's not their fault, they can't have the understanding of the period of time in which these events took place. It just gets more and more and more and more and more and more wrong. I think the internet, which is obviously a phenomenal resource for people who want to look things up, is also full of complete rubbish about the Beatles.
And he talks shit on the internet, and it comes back to get back interpretations. So...
And I've noticed it with reactions to Get Back, where I've heard people speak about Get Back, and I was watching the same thing they were. And okay, I'm not saying my point of view is the only valid one, far from it. But when I hear what people took from Get Back, how they interpreted a particular moment, I'm thinking, how did you see that? You know, what people bring their own agenda to what they see. Yeah, I mean, whatever.
Lewison, in my mind, can't possibly imagine someone understanding the scene or the communication better than he does. I'm not saying that I do. I understand it differently, and I probably understand it differently because I'm coming from a different walk of life as a queer person with a history of substance abuse, weird communication, and a lot of therapy. I'm going to read things differently, and we need all kinds of people reading things differently to get a real picture of the Beatles, and we need to be open to hearing those takes in order to really understand this history. So as we go forward, I'm going to talk about my interpretation of situations. My interpretation. This is my bias. I am a journalist, but I am super fucking biased. So I try to counteract my bias with 8,000 readings, and that gets repetitive and and I obviously am too thorough and talk too much, we know, but it's because I'm trying to deal with my bias. So it's my interpretation that I have always felt since the beginning, before I knew shit about the Beatles. Like, I became a Beatles fan on April 14th, 2022. And it started with me realizing that on April 12th, 2022, Paul McCartney was left-handed. In those 2 days, I watched Get Back, right? Because like that's what a normal person does. So I didn't know jack about Paul McCartney. Obviously, I didn't even know the dude was left-handed. And I had seen a bunch of times of them performing, but I just like never, my fucking dumb idiot brain didn't put it together. And I was like, oh my God, he's left-handed. That's interesting. So anyway, I watched this and I'm like, this dude's terrified. The Beatles are about to break up. All I knew about Get Back at all was that George Harrison left during it. That's all I knew about it. And I knew like the 4 Beatles names. And that was like the extent of the whole thing. And so I didn't know the story. I didn't know anything about the White Album. I don't know when I knew that Ringo left the Beatles before. Like, I have no idea. I knew about their music, the songs that I knew publicly, but all I could see was, oh my God, yeah, he's being bossy, he's being controlling, but it's because he's scared to death. He obviously needs this band. He needs this group to work together.
I don't know what it is, that I'm moaning about, but it's just sort of...
I must admit, I can't really see it because it just seems the last 2 days everything's gone so ridiculously well.
He's right, yeah. It's just funny to sort of realise that after this is all over, you'll be off in a black bag somewhere on the Albert Hall, you know. Yeah.
And there were these moments of this group, they would just come together. And they would meld together, and it was amazing. I just read something where John says that there's like no magic during Let It Be. It's bullshit. It's not true. We all saw during Get Back, there's so much magic. Maybe it was the camera of Let It Be, the idea that we were going to try and create something phony. The camera went on, and it almost happened in Magical Mystery Tour, but we managed to just pick a little magic out. By the time we got to Let It Be, we couldn't play the game anymore. We could see through each other, and therefore we felt uncomfortable because up till then, we really believed intensely in what we were doing and the product we put out, and everything had to just be right, and we believed. Suddenly, we didn't believe. It'd come to a point where it was no longer creating magic. But it's easy to forget that when you're looking back in a negative way, and also because if you were high on heroin most of the time, right? So let's not mince words.
Just don't leave the needles lying around, you know. We've got a bad reputation now with John getting busted and that. I know what it's like for showbiz people. They're under a great strain and they need a little relaxation.
Yes,
and that's why he's going to bed. It's a choice between that and exercise, you know, and drugs win hand down. I say hand down.
Well, shooting is exercise.
Shooting is exercise, oh yeah.
Is there any need to do this in public, Mr. Lemon? At the moment.
But Paul, he says like moments where he's like, I'm scared of being the boss. I want an answer. He wanted this enthusiasm, and he was trying to think of any single thing to get the Beatles to come back together and be strong the way that they were a year ago or 2 years ago when Brian Epstein was still alive. Cut in for the pronunciation thing right here. Thank you. So Brian's last name is pronounced Epstein, not Epstein. Publicly, as in the press, particularly in the US, Brian's last name was pronounced as Epstein due to understanding that to be the more common American pronunciation. But in close quarters among family and friends, it is pronounced Epstein. And no one wishes that this wasn't true more than I do, because every single video that I mentioned his fucking name before Yellow Submarine, I said it wrong, like a smart person who knows about the Beatles would. Frankly, Brian used both pronunciations. I doubt he would really care either way, but now it's stuck in my brain the Epstein way, and so I always get some BS about it. So here's a little clip from Get Back.
Ever since Mr. Epstein passed away, it's never been the same.
I mean, we've been very negative since Mr. Epstein passed away.
And I'll let you know, this is the way that I say it now, and it might be the way that you say it now, but I don't think Brian would care. We are back on the rails now.
While using from information I received while using a Ouija board, I believe that there will be an attempt to assassinate you. The spirit that gave me this information was Brian Epstein.
Like I said, it went both ways. It's stuck with Epstein in my head now, so we're stuck here. It is absolutely devastating to look at. He's so panicked that he's not, and it takes a long time because Paul McCartney is extremely selfish during this time of his life. And I think it took a while and I don't think he's like this anymore. This is my interpretation, that he doesn't see anything that's going on with anyone else at all. He's just trying to think like, okay, let's make it work like this. Let's make it work like this. You know, he's not operating properly. Okay, if I can control this enough, if I can make this a good enough song, we always get along when we're making good songs. If I can be like this, if I can then it'll be okay. I'll get George on side because I was always able to get George on side. And he didn't stop to pay attention or look at George's fucking face. George would say things and Paul was just like in one ear, out the other, didn't care, didn't notice. And I'm not saying it didn't matter to Paul. I think it would have mattered if he could have stopped thinking long enough to pay attention to someone else. And I think that boy was terrified. You know, it goes back to that stuntedness thing. All right, I'm going to take a break, and then I'll come back and read from the Get Back book, and then we have, like, so much more script left. Good Lord. And then we have another section of script left. Gotta take a break. I need everyone to know. Fuck. I need everyone to know, like mere moments before I started getting ready for this. And I hadn't been crying about this goddamn anything. Is my thing... Hang on. I haven't cried about shit for 2 videos. And the one before that was the White Album video, which everybody knows. I cried about it the whole time. And I was doing so good. So good. So good. I started crying moments before I put my makeup on. And I am still here today to talk to you about these dumb men. Why? Why are we here? Just to suffer? Insecurities plague how I dress for these. Cool. Alrighty. There is something that I said during my second or third most emotional rant during the White Album project, which I bring up all the time because first off, it is my love letter. Second off, it is germane to this conversation. I'm going to stick it in right here because I am so tired of the interpretation of George and Paul in their friendship, their relationship, the way that they acted together. Nothing is immutable when it comes to the human experience. These two knew each other too long, frankly, like from the early teen days, pubescence, you know, they've known each other too well. Everybody knows about circle jerks. They know each other in and out. And I mean, my brother and I are best friends. He's my best friend. We went through a year in middle school where we hated each other. I mean, God. And we were not famous. We were just redheads on a swim team. I cannot imagine how complicated, complex, and difficult people who grew up in Liverpool during the post-war era. It's just, I'm like, can we throw these boys a bone? Can we throw them a bone? My God. So anyway, here's that little tiny clip. And I'm going to cut myself off because I spoil the end of this video in it. There's just so much that is extremely misunderstood about them. It's so black and white, the way that these guys are interpreted. It's disgusting to me. Someone will have known George in 1984 and they'll say he hated Paul, as if there weren't times when he loved him, as if Paul hasn't spent the last 24 years, especially like the last 5, talking about how much he wishes he could say to George that he loves him.
I would say I love you, because growing up in Liverpool, you never said that. You never told a guy you loved him.
I'm begging you to throw these guys any sort of consideration, any sort of nuance, context, understanding that George is one to hold a grudge and Paul is one to never sit down and communicate properly, that Paul thinks he's right, he understands one thing one time and really doesn't do a whole lot of self-introspection until decades later. Obviously, the Beatles worked out a whole lot of stuff. They even had struggles with each other during the anthology stuff.
Well, couldn't we do Blue Man of Kentucky? Well, this is short version.
But like I said, Olivia talked about how they walked around, how they walked around George's grounds and arm in arm and just talked for hours and hours, and they didn't want anyone else around them while they did it. They just wanted to be together. That is the end of George's life. In the last few years of his life, when he had time with Paul, he didn't want to share it. Please. Stop crying, you dumb bitch. Stop crying, you dumb bitch. Okay, anyway.
Okay, girls.
Give in. I give in.
Perhaps it isn't love when I say you are what I love the most. You are the knife I turn inside myself. This is love. This, my dear, is love. Kafka. Get Back book. So I highly suggest you shell out sticker price $60. I don't think it's nearly that much these days. I got this one new, but I never get my Beatles books new. I never get any books new. Do you think I have money? I don't have money. I highly suggest, if this is of interest to you and you don't have 80 hours to listen to the Nagra tapes and try to work on your transcripts, which I have my own transcript of the Nagra tapes, not someone else's, my own, because frankly, I've listened and read, and the only other person that I would trust is Dan Rivkin. You should go and look at what Peter Jackson, the Beatles themselves signed off on this, the transcripts of scenes of Get Back, because there are scenes we see, but a lot of stuff is edited. These are not entirely, I'm not saying untruthful, but because of the things we don't see on screen, it's not an entirely accurate portrayal of what is happening. And oftentimes it is, in a way, more flattering what we see on screen. Actually, the better way of explaining this is not to say necessarily like inaccurate. It's weird because I never really paid this much attention with holding transcripts next to the actual footage of Get Back. I just caution against saying this is exactly the way the conversations went, because actually some of the conversations that I dig into pretty hard, they are out of order, and I have footage overlaying or cut in, and I'm cutting in footage of part of a conversation that happens 2 minutes before the part in the transcript. So the conversations are edited, I think, to make them flow, to make it make more sense, to kind of parse through the Beatlese of the situation. And it's not that it's like, oh my God, it's so wrong. There are bits that are like, okay, it's cut pretty sensationally, particularly the "then they were two" thing.
And then there were two.
Because after Paul says that, there's a joke. Someone intimated in one of my early videos that the way that went down is, oh, well, he was joking. He thought it was funny, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know, dog. I looked at that video. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm really upset, I make a joke to try to pull myself out of it. Maybe that's just me. It's not just me. Paul was really upset. But there are instances in which this is less cut and dry. So if you're really interested in seeing like the order of things versus the footage on the screen, or in the cases where I'm able to cut the footage in, it's more so available on the Patreon. Not that it helps me or anything. You can pause and take a look at it, because it's worth just kind of noting, not to look at the conversations versus the video with skepticism. That's not it. It's to look at the pattern of speech. This is the way that they were communicating. This is the circular nature of this conversation. How are they trying to resolve these conflicts? That's kind of more of what I'm encouraging you do. if that makes sense. Any of this makes sense. I figured out how to summarize this after I filmed that. It reveals poor communication, or the extent of how poor the communication is, over poor character. Because you're going to show the worst parts, but you're not going to show, oh, that's an extra 5 minutes of them saying the same thing. That's why I think it's kind of important, if you're really digging into this, to take a look at transcripts, consider listening to the Nagra tapes, definitely take a look at the Get Back book. I put the used cost on screen. It was very cheap. So it's worth looking into for sure. But there are moments, they're talking about the show, the Get Back show. They're talking about what they're trying to do. John says, I said what I've been thinking. And Paul, I don't know if I want to go John says, Paul says, John says, Paul says, George says. I might go in and out of it, okay? I'm going to have this stuff on screen. So if I'm just reading it like line by line, just check and see. John says, I've said what I've been thinking. Paul, are you still thinking that now? What are you thinking now? John, I'm still thinking about it. Michael, see, I think Mal is nearest to it. In effect, it should be entertainment for the world, and therefore it should be the most entertaining show featuring the four of you. It should be great, great showbiz, because that's what's going to make people happy. A smile on the lips of a boy in France or a tear in the eye of a big girl in America is what we want, because entertainment is what we're selling. Laughing. Michael, right? George sings, that's entertainment. Paul says, there's certain basic things we've just got to do if we're going to do it. As far as I can see it, there's only two ways about it. And that's what I was shouting about in the last meeting we had. There's only two things, you know. We're going to do it or we're not going to do it. And I want a decision, because I'm not interested enough to spend my fucking days farting around here while everyone makes up their minds whether or not they want to do it, you know. I'll do it if everyone else will. And if everyone wants to do it, then all right. But, you know, it's just a bit soft. It's like at school, you know. You've got to be there. And I haven't. You know, I've left school. We've all left school, and you don't have to go. The exasperation. Paul is terrified of losing the Beatles. He is begging desperately, in his own way. It's not the best. It's not good at all. To keep the Beatles together. And he's like, please, please, make a decision. Don't leave me here. Answer me. Do you still care? Are you still here? Because I've messed up. I haven't shown up. We've all left school. We don't have to be here. Brian isn't here anymore. So are you here? Because I want to be here. I want a decision. Answer me.
I'll either get any support or anything. So I just think, oh, well, fuck it. Carry on. But I know it's right. Yeah. And you know it's right.
He comes off like a toddler throwing a tantrum. If you're not willing enough to stop and give him a little bit of goddamn credit, this man is afraid. Sometimes I look at the comments regarding Get Back and I'm like, am I the only one with a charitable fucking opinion of Paul McCartney during this time? Shit. Stop crying, you dumb bitch. Am I the only one who like sees it as it is, other than Ringo? I swear to God, Ringo is the only one who's like singing Paul. There are moments during Get Back in photos. He heard Paul and Ringo saw Paul. They did some songs, just the two of them together after Ringo returned. And I think he started to really understand where Paul was coming from. I might seem like I'm yelling at you. And I'm not yelling at you. I'm yelling at this situation. I'm yelling at comments that I got at the very beginning of my projects, like in June of 2022. And none of those people are still here. I mean, maybe some of you are still here. Pete Stanton, you're still here, Pete Stanton. You've been here since like the first video. Everybody clap for Pete Stanton. I remember you guys. The people who were really mean about this at the beginning aren't still here. And I think it's kind of funny because I think the real Beatles fans are the ones who are still here watching 9-hour videos of some idiot who doesn't really play music talking about the Beatles. So good for you. But I'm like, oh, you guys only had your certain surface level interpretation from a Philip Norman book you read a decade ago, and you were never willing to change your opinion, were you? So I'm not yelling at you guys, because I have, outside of like the 20% of angry people, those aren't Lars land visitors. Those are Blue Meanies. I have the most nuanced, understanding, loving, thoughtful comment section full of subscribers who care deeply, deeply about the Beatles and the Beatles as humans and the inner circle as humans. So I'm not yelling at you. I'm yelling at the meanies, the blue meanies. So please understand, I think I'm not yelling at you. Perhaps I am yelling with you. Anyway, that was my disclaimer about me yelling. I'm sorry. This was supposed to be 45 minutes. I sometimes wonder if we, the 4.5K subscribers, less the people who subscribed for the Lost video, none of you are here, care about Paul McCartney in an understanding way. It's all of us here who understand this have had mental breakdowns. All of us are mentally ill and understand it. We've come out of it. We've gone through therapy. We might still be struggling at times. I see you. We might have substance abuse issues. I see you. I'm recovering as well. And we might say, oh shit, I've been there. I see you. And it's not black and white. None of this is black and white. Like I said, it's not always a flattering portrayal. But it is this book, Nagra Tapes as a whole, it's very funny. Not ha-ha funny, but wow, isn't that such is life funny? That this difficulty brought about Let It Be, which I find to be such a beautiful album. And I think it's a very honest album of the Beatles kind of having some fun. Here's a fun clip.
Do you want some sandwiches? We don't eat these. Paul, do you want some sandwiches? Hang on.
Right.
Do you want a dry bun?
A dry bun, yeah.
It's like a rock cake.
The band continues to work on I've Got a Feeling and Don't Let Me Down. George, any buns or anything? John, yeah, there's some. There's some in the bag under here. George, do you want some sandwiches? Paul, do you want some sandwiches? Hang on. Whistles to Ray Freeborn, assistant director. John, Ray, do you want a dry bun? George, oh, don't eat that. John, I mean, it's nice, but it's... George, a dry bun. Yeah. John, it's like a rock cake, but it needs some butter or something. Yoko, these are vegetarian if you want some, George. Ringo, some rolls and things. George, eating. That's what I want. You know, anything. See, it's not all so bad. Here's another fun one. I'm going to read some fun ones in here as well. Paul and Ringo are the first to arrive. At the piano, Paul plays a snatch of The Long and Winding Road without vocals, then Oh Darling and Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Enter George, who has a copy of the fan magazine, The Beatles book. Ringo, hi George. George, sorry for being late, but I fell asleep again. So relatable. Paul, John's late. George, Beatles book. Paul, good this month? George, seems to be getting older and older. Paul, deteriorating. Ringo, slipping back into its old ways. George, yep, and it seems to be a good thing. What do you think of George's pseudo-tie sweatshirt? I think it's terrible.
What do you think of George's pseudo-tie sweatshirt? I think it's terrible. I think your beard suits you, man.
Final fun one. Same day here. Ringo's playing on the piano. Paul, yeah, great. Are you going to write another? Ringo huffs. Paul, yeah, okay, I know, I understand. Ringo, yes, I am, but you know, it's just... Paul, I know, I realize it's a daft question. Ringo, I really do get fed up with... Paul, not knowing the chords yet. Ringo plays piano chords. How do you do it? George, oh, what's that one? He's got a great one. Paul, Picasso? George, yeah. Ringo, yeah, but I can't fit it in when I play it. That's the only drag with that. Paul, let's hear it, because it's actually a fast one too, isn't it? And then Ringo plays some Picasso, and then Paul goes, oh, baby. Ringo sings affirmatively, oh, baby. Paul, you should do it, though. Yeah. Yeah, and I've got taken a trip to Carolina. Oh, baby. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, so now we're going to read the tougher stuff. So later on that day, Friday, they play 1 after 9:09. Paul and George are so excited about it. And George says, yeah, well, shall we practice it for a bit? Or maybe we should just do without practicing. John goes, what? What? George says, you know, practicing will fuck it up.
How near are we to getting the stuff in?
I won't lie, I'm not too good.
So it's Monday, January 6th. Paul. Morning, George. George. Morning, all. Ringo. Morning, George. George. Didn't have any sleep last night. John. Didn't you? Why? Paul. Just through lack of sleep. George. Just through... Because we're getting, it gets a bit late, It just gets so late that it's early. Paul. Yeah. George. And then you're just, dropping off and it's still dark and then Mal is calling and all that. Michael lindsay-hogg. There also comes a point where it's not worth sleeping, I think. George. Oh, it's fun though. I feel quite good actually. Then looks at Paul. I was trying to ring you this morning. Paul. Yes, I know. George. To wake you up. Paul. I know. I was complaining to the operator and telling him, can I tell you about my phone going wrong? But I hadn't switched it through. And then Michael interrupts and talks about wanting to do the show with a big audience.
Wouldn't it be nice if we did this show with a big audience?
Yes. I think we should forget the whole idea of this show.
Yeah, just that's it. Okay.
Paul says, it's easy for someone like me who likes to get stuff done to come on too strong. I get excited and I get too keen about something and I talk too fast. Oh, well, we could do it like that. We could be there on Monday morning. Twickenham will do it. It's great. And then it got a bit difficult. And I would say, it would be great if we could film the Beatles working. It would be fabulous. And they'd be like, well, are you sure you want to do it that way? It was getting a very lukewarm reception and I didn't quite realize how I was. Looking back at the film now, I can see that it could be easily construed as someone coming on a bit too heavy, particularly as I was just a member of a band and not a producer or director. But I just thought there are moments, here, even just a few days before George leaves the band, where he and Paul are really, they're gelling, they're getting along, and these are just snippets of the Nagra Tapes. We do see a lot of the bad times in this book. We see, I think, a 98% very accurate transcript. They show all the interruptions and everything. And it's not, we have a thunderstorm going in the background, by the way. It's not a positive portrayal of the Beatles or what was going on here. So it's very nice and a little refreshing to see that there were like some happy moments in here. So here we are, page 45. The band moves on to Two of Us. While George is trying to figure it out, Paul is saying, it slows down there. Something sort of happened, but just don't ignore it, just let it. You and I have memories. George, how do you mean it slows down? Paul, I mean, ignore the fact that it changes into a middle eight. George, I see. I thought you meant we must slow down. Paul, no. George, it's a long break, that one. Going home, you and I have memories. Paul, 1, 2, 3, 4. The song resumes. Paul, see, we're really going to have to bring it together because we're all at odds. We're doing that thing that we did on the Beatles, the White Album. We're all playing, do you know what I mean? We've got to get... George, yeah, but that's... Paul, and they're talking over each other, so while I'm reading this, it might be a little confusing. Paul... The riffs, when the riffs bits come there. George, there's no riffs. I mean, it's nice just to get what you play. Paul, no, but look, you and I aren't in. George, you and I, memories. Paul, it's not together so that it's not sounding together even on. George, and so we can only play until we find that bit. Paul, or we can stop and say it's not together. George, yes, then you've got to carry on until it gets together. So I mean that it's all right. I need to play it until it sounds as though we're blending with the rest. Paul, I never know what to say to that, because what I want to say is come on and play, but I can't. And then we get into that one. George, yes, because, Paul, okay, so here we go. And then you hear bass. Paul says, it's like it's complicated now. See if we can get it simpler and then complicate it where it needs complications. But it's complicated in the bit. George, it's not complicated. I'm just trying to, I'll play the chords if you like. But for my part, it was just enthusiasm, and I'd sit and talk with the director. But I think it led to a couple of Barneys, and in one of them, George said, right, I'm not having this. I think I was probably suggesting what he might play, which is always a tricky one in a band. And he goes on to talk about Hey Jude. In a group, it's democratic, and he didn't have to listen to me, so I think he got pissed off with me coming on with ideas all the time. I think to his mind, it was probably me trying to dominate. It wasn't what I was trying to do, but that was how it seemed. And it's interesting to me because while I'm reading this, we're seeing a lot of this conversation in Get Back. John is just not in this conversation at all. And he should be involving himself because he's playing as well, but whatever. Paul, quietly, with urgency. No, come on. You always get annoyed when I'm trying to say that. George, all I'm trying to do, I'm trying to find Paul.
I'm trying to help, you know, but I always hear myself like, annoying you. And I'm trying to...
No, you're not annoying. I'm annoying you.
But you know what I mean? Well, you know, we do this then, and we...
Which he says, like it's very obvious that Paul does annoy him anymore. He still annoys him. Paul, but you know what I mean? We do this then, ... And then, I don't know. Yeah, I can't do it on fucking film either. Can't do it on camera. As time went by, I talked them into Let It Be. Then we had terrible arguments, so we get the breakup of the Beatles on film instead of what we really wanted. It was probably a better story, a sad story, but there you are. In fact, what happened was, when we got in there, it showed how the breakup of a group works. We didn't realize that we were actually breaking up as it was happening. And this is part where Paul stands up, and he's brushing through his extremely dirty, greasy hair. And he looks so stressed out. And John says... And I think he's trying to like joke, bring some lightness into this moment when he goes,
Forget about candy camera.
And maybe he's trying to reach Paul a little bit. And Paul says, I can't though, you know, it's always like I always feel as though I'm trying to put you down and stuff, but I'm not. I'm trying to stop us all playing until we know what we're playing. George, yeah, but you've got to play in order to find which fits and which doesn't. I mean, I'll wait until you work out all your bits, then work my part out if you like. Paul, yeah, I know. George, well, you know, it's like that. It's a matter of working it out with you while you're working your bits out, you know. Have you got your bass bit? Paul, okay, look, I'm not trying to say that. You know, you're doing it again as though I'm trying to say that. And see, Paul, I don't think Paul's listening to what George is saying at all. I don't understand where, like, this is the part where I'm like, what am I missing in Beatlese, their language here? Because I'm clearly missing something. Even we actually see, this is one of those times, because it's not always like this. You have to pay attention to their mouths moving and what's playing on this and what conversation they're having in Get Back, because the footage isn't lined up a lot. This is one of those times where we're actually seeing the conversation. We're seeing what George is saying, and his body language isn't that aggressive. Paul seems like he's taking it as George is really seeing him as the aggressor. I think George is coming in with a really conciliatory, whatever, attitude of like, I'm trying to figure out where you are so I can get where... Lars, stop bumping that thing. It makes an annoying sound. George is like, I'm trying to see where you are so I can get where you are. Okay, please? I don't feel like he's coming across like he's annoyed. When we get down to brass taxes, when George is talking about how we're trying to play, Paul is already exasperated. And then when he says this is when George gets defensive.
It's like, should we play guitar all through Hey Jude? Well, I don't think we should.
Okay, look, I'm not trying to say that. You know, you're doing it again as though I'm trying to say that. And what we said the other day, you know, I'm not trying to get you. I really am just trying to say, look, lads, the band, you know, shall we try it like this, you know? And then George says, it's funny that it only occurs when Paul, I know it. It's this one. It's like, shall we play the guitar through Hey Jude? Well, I don't think we should. Now, let's take note here. Paul brings up Hey Jude, that he brings up Hey Jude a little too much. He thinks that this situation is water under the bridge. They begin working on Hey Jude, and I hope I have a picture of my timeline from the White Album. They start working on Jude the last week in July and work on it through the middle of the first week of August, maybe the second week a little bit. Jude goes through several iterations, and this is one of the worst brawls, verbal, with George and Paul while George is trying to pick something that probably sounded pretty good. He's repeating after every line. Paul doesn't like that. Whatever Paul said, however Paul said it, it must have been pretty bad, because George was really offended by it. Paul says things like, well, George is a guitarist. He probably was upset. I'm interested in seeing how Paul conveyed this, because I bet it wasn't very kindly. George said, personally, I'd found that for the last couple of albums, probably since we stopped touring, the freedom to be able to play as a musician was being curtailed mainly by Paul. There used to be a situation where we'd go in, as we did as kids, pick up our guitars and learn the tune and chords and start talking about arrangements. But there came a time, probably around the time of Sgt. Pepper, which was maybe why I didn't enjoy that so much, where Paul had fixed an idea in his brain as to how to record one of his songs. He wasn't open to anyone else's suggestions. John was always much more open when it came to how to record one of his songs. With Paul, it was taken to the most ridiculous situations where I'd open my guitar case to go get my guitar and he'd say, no, we're not doing that yet. We're going to do a piano track with Ringo and then we'll do that later. It got so there was very little to do other than sit around and hear him going, fixing a hole with Ringo keeping the time. Then he'd overdub the bass and whatever else. It became stifling, so that although this new album was supposed to break away from that type of recording, we were going back to playing live, it was still very much that kind of situation where he'd already had in his mind what he wanted. Paul wanted nobody to play on his songs until he decided how it should go. For me, it was like, what am I doing here? This is painful. And then he goes, then superimposed on top of that was Yoko, and there were negative vibes at the time. John and Yoko were out on a limb. I don't think he wanted much to be hanging out with us, and I think Yoko was pushing him out of the band in as much she didn't want him hanging out with us. It is important to state that a lot of water has gone under the bridge, and that as we talk now, everybody's good friends, and we have a better understanding of the past, but talking about what was happening at that time, you can see it was strange. Where things do get relatively uncomfy is that I cannot and will not ever throw Mark Lewison out as a source entirely. That would be to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if only due to his general access to, or previous access to, a lot of Beatles information. On September 11th, 2019, The Guardian published an article called "This Tape Rewrites Everything We Knew About the Beatles." And in this, it talks about a September 8th, 1969 board meeting with the Beatles, where the meeting is recorded because Ringo is in the hospital. So it's between John, Paul, and George, and they meet at Apple Corps. It starts with John saying, "Ringo, you can't be here, but this is so you can hear what we're discussing." So the tape talks about them considering making another album. It talks about kind of where they're going from here. And, you know, we all know a month later, John leaves the band. But during this meeting, John proposes like a formula. And this is why the fans call this the 4442 meeting. He says to Paul, we should each have 4 songs per album, and then 2 if Ringo wants them. And then John refers to this as the Lennon-McCartney myth, which is indicating that their partnership is no longer relevant to the authorship of their songs. This is what the article says. Then Paul, sounding, shall we say, relaxed, responds to the news that George now has equal standing as a composer with John and himself by muttering something mildly provocative. "I thought until this album, George's songs weren't that good," he says, which is a pretty double-edged compliment since the earlier compositions he's implicitly disparaging include Taxman and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. There's a nettled rejoinder from George. "That's a matter of taste. All down the line, people have liked my songs." And then John goes on to say, nobody liked Maxwell's Silver Hammer. And Paul says, "I recorded it because I liked it." And they kind of have a fight talking about whether or not Paul was writing it for the hits or blah, blah, blah. And John was saying, well, we should only write these if there's like a higher purpose to the music that we're making. It's a whole thing. I wish that we had the whole recording where I could listen to it and have a transcript, but we don't. So what's really important here is that Paul just straight out says, high, drunk, whatever, or not, he says, "I thought until this album that George's songs weren't that good." Just like, that's just, he says it so casually that it's just normal. I'm interested in seeing how Paul conveyed this, because I bet it wasn't very kindly in order to make such a big dent that in January, this is 4 months later, it's not a lot of time, that Paul thinks, well, we've already concluded this, we've resolved this. Jude came out, Ringo came back to the band, it's all fine now. I can bring this up as an example while we're having an argument. George is still hurt by this. George, in spite of being so spiritual and acting as if he understands very well the situation, is extremely sensitive to this. He might understand where Paul's coming from. Doesn't change the fact that he's still hurt by this. And we all know this line.
Okay, well, I don't mind. I'll play, whatever you want me to play. or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. You know, whatever it is that will please you, I'll do it. But I don't think you really know what that one is.
I'm going to read this whole conversation here. Paul, no, it's not like that now. Now we're rehearsing and we're trying to get it together for the TV show. So really, like you said, we've only been through 4 numbers. And this is the point where Paul says we should probably have 20 or 30 of the songs, really vamp them and know all of this, which is insane because at this point they're like only 2 weeks away from the intended rehearsal date for what they think at this point is a live performance. Where are they going to pull these 20 or 30 songs out of them? A few moments later, Paul, you see, look, now this is the nub, I think. I think we've wasted a lot of time. I think we do, physically waste a hell of a lot of time, and the 4 of us together. And John stops him and says, I think if it's your song, you've got to do it exactly how you want it. You say, don't play that, play that. It's up to you, Paul, I'm scared of that one, me being the boss, and I have been for a couple of years. I don't believe that John's insertion is in the documentary. And so what John is saying right here is actually backing up what Paul has been saying. And he's like, listen, don't make it a big thing. Don't dig into it. Just say, hey, it's my song. Let's just play it like this. Don't make it a big thing. Just do it. Fine. And so what we see is Paul saying, I'm scared about being the boss of the Beatles. But it's possible that Paul is also saying, I'm scared of being a boss of my song. This, for me, was eventually what was going to break the Beatles up. I was starting to feel it wasn't a good idea to have ideas. Whereas in the past, I'd always done that in total innocence, even though I was maybe writing roughshod. And I have been for a couple of years. And we all have, no pretending about that. The problem is that we should all have written our own tunes. And if you want improvisation, then we should say, right, we improvise here. But that puts much more work on each of us because then we've got to work out my bass line. John says, I'd say improvise it, man. Paul, yeah, but it's a point of theory, isn't it? It's not just to do with playing music, this. So what Paul is saying is, yeah, we usually probably would improvise it, which they do. They talk about this a lot.
We'd go in the studio, 10 in the morning. This was the first time George and Ringo had heard any of the songs. So this is how good they were. So John and I would go, it goes like this, she loves you, yeah, yeah, or whatever it was. And they go, mm-hmm. George would cop the chords. You go, not writing them down, it's just like, yeah. Because, I can see what you're doing, because I'm one of you.
Some of them would bring in a song, and they would start playing. Paul talks about it in the 8 Days a Week documentary. I'll include it right here.
If I would just sort of go, well, one for the money, they go, bam, and they go, what song is that? And then they go, boom, 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 da, bah. Everyone would just be in bang. We just knew each other that well,
They pick it up immediately. So John starts playing something. George immediately knows, this is where I go. Ringo, he intuits the beat in the Beatles. Immediately, he picks it up. So they do improvise quite often while they're working the song out. But Paul is saying, yeah, but this is a point of theory that we don't have as much time as usual. We have to make this work. They're all stepping on each other's toes, trying to figure out how to make the songs work. And Paul is not hearing George when he says, I'm going to try to work my bits out while you work your bits out, okay? And Paul is saying, well, no, we should stop and make it out right now. And George is saying, okay, but I am trying to work my bits out while you work your bits out. So you work your bits out and I'll try to listen along and do the improvisation thing because that way we're doubling our working time. And Paul is saying, no, listen to me. And it's causing so many issues because this is how the band communicates. This is how they solve their problem. They don't talk about how they're hurting each other's feelings. They solve their issues. They communicate. This is their group therapy through making music.
We've done this a long time. And as I said before, no matter how bad it was, and some days it was very bad in the studio, just the atmosphere and the tension and the distance, the counting came in. If someone counted it in, we all gave everything.
So when they're not even on the same page through making music, they're doomed. They are doomed to lose another band member. This is how they lost Ringo, and this is how they will lose George. Ringo says, George was writing more. He wanted things to go his way. When we first started, they basically went John and Paul's way because they were the writers, but George was finding his independence, and he wouldn't be dominated as much by Paul because in the end, Paul wanted to point out the solo to George, who would say, look, I'm a guitarist, I'll play the solo. And he always did, and he always played fine solos, fine meaning good. The Beatles weren't always super complimentary, like lavishly complimentary with their language. When it's like, oh, that's fine, oh, that's all right, that means it's good. It got a bit like, I wrote the song and I want it this way, whereas before it was, I wrote the song, give me what you can.
One is on the road.
It's a bit like Lime Street Station.
What?
Reminds me a bit of Lime Street Station.
Paul, Lennon's late again. Ringo steps in and defends John and says, well, between 10 and 11 is the time. Michael, this is one of those times where I feel like, I understand you, MLH. No, one shouldn't be late. Paul says, I'm thinking of getting rid of him. And Ringo says, I'm never late. And MLH says, Michael Lindsay-Hogg, I sometimes call him MLH, just like I call George Martin GM sometimes. MLH says, because everybody else is late once. And that's... his interjections are cut out of Get Back Here, and I understand why they cut it out here. Paul says, he's never late. He's a bloody pro, is Ringo. That is so poignant. I'm going to link my Ringo Ever Eric Never clip right here.
When's late again?
Between 10 and 11 is the time.
Thinking of getting rid of him.
I'm never late.
He's never late. He's a bloody pro, is Ringo.
In all actuality, this song could and is probably easily not just about Paul. It's certainly not about Ringo at all, but it's probably also about John. That being said, the public narrative, my understanding of this song, even George's narrative in a lot of cases, take Wah Wah as a song about Paul. So this isn't necessarily a song about Paul, but this video and regardless of understanding that this is actually a song about his feeling toward the Beatles, this video is about George and Paul. Okay. Let me have my cough drop. This morning, Paul is making Get Back for the first time. And it's just him, Ringo, and George because Lennon's late again. In this moment, I would like to assert and remind that the three of them are getting along just fine.
Yeah, it's good. It's, musically and it's great.
I think the tension really arises when Paul's behavior changes when John is there. He picks on George a whole lot. His behavior is mostly toward George, but it really comes out when John is there. I'm not saying anything about it because I couldn't tell you particularly why, but I've noticed it. So now they're having this conversation. This I find to be an extremely interesting conversation. They're sitting there with MLH and I think a few other people. They're talking about what they're going to do with the show. Paul says, if we cancel the show now, we'd still be throwing it away, but that's the way we tend to do it. Get halfway through a thing, George says, and call it a day. Paul says, that's where all the money goes. Michael says, but I think that the worst we should have is a documentary, which is a commercial enterprise. This is hilarious, right? There's no reason, I think, why we shouldn't also get a show, although none of us yet are happy with anything that you have done in here. Paul says, I am. Michael says, yeah, I don't agree with you. Paul, it's fine. Come on, it's fine, It's all right. The thing is, it's just not as good as it could be yet, but here we are. We'll do it. We'll sing songs, I mean, really, what you mean is that you haven't thought of the great idea yet. The great idea is just leave us to it. Just don't do the show. George says, that's pretty good. John says, if we can think of any sort of gimmick, well, we just have the worst that we have is a documentary of us making an LP, if we don't get into a show. Just make an LP. And George says,
ever since Mr. Epstein passed away.
Who passed away?
It's never been the same.
Paul, no, because nobody will take any, you won't ever say anything. It's going to be sort of dull.
I mean, we've been very negative since Mr. Epstein passed away. And that's why all of us in turn has been sick of the group.
You know, because there's nothing positive in it. You know, it is a bit of a drag. The only way for it not to be a bit of a drag is for the four of us to think, should we make it positive? George, well, Paul, or should we fuck it? You know, there's only two alternatives. And then John says, I've got an incentive. I've decided all the things that we do. The whole point of it is communication. Paul, yeah. John, and to be on TV is communication because we've got a chance to smile at people like the global broadcast, like All You Need Is Love. So that's my incentive for doing it. MLH says, you know, All You Need Is Love and Hey Jude did communicate. Paul, of course they did. Of course they did. John, yeah, I just thought, you know, if we need to think of any incentive, the incentive is to communicate. Michael, I agree. Paul, there really is no one there now to say do that, whereas there always used to be. And we just sort of, oh, fucking hell, you know, keep getting us up at 8, but it's us that has to get us up at 8 now, you know. But that's only growing up, you know. Your daddy goes away at a certain point in your life. You stand on your own feet. I mean, that's all we've been faced with. Daddy's gone away now, you know, and we're on our own at the holiday camp. And, you know, I think we either go home or we do it.
There really is no one there now to say, do it. Whereas there always used to be. But Daddy's gone away now, you know, and we're on our own at the holiday camp. And, you know, I think we either go home.
What I find so interesting about this point is that MLH is asking them questions, trying to suss out where they are on the part of the show. And they're not really talking to each other. They're talking to Michael. And it's like, well, shit, all they need is fucking group therapy. They're open to talking to someone else while the others are in the room. They're speaking it kindly. They're all taking accountability. Ever since Mr. Epstein passed away, it's never been the same. Well, ever since Mr. Epstein passed away, we've all been in the doldrums. And later on, Ringo says, you know, we've all been getting grumpy for the last 18 months.
But if it is going to be your last TV show, your only TV show...
but you're only surmising, Robbie.
Well,
Just because we got a bit grumpy.
No, I am.
We've been getting grumpy for the last 18 months.
No, but
they're all willing to talk to someone else about the situation. However, in 1969, therapy was not nearly as effective as it is now, and 4 macho men from Liverpool are not going to group therapy for their band. They don't like each other right now. Michael says, but do you still want to perform in front of an audience, or do you just see yourself as a recording group? I think it's communication, and I think part of communication is people seeing you do it. Paul, I think there is something to do with an audience there. Yeah, I think we've got a bit shy, you know. I think I've got a bit shy of certain things, you know. Michael, I guess maybe the difficulty is also getting up in front of an audience and trying to get something as good, but maybe not the same thing. And that's a very hard thing to get back. In other words, you mustn't think of getting back what you had because you don't want it. And they're talking about the show, and George goes, really, I don't want to do any of my songs on the show because I know they'll just turn out shitty because they'd come out like a compromise. Whereas in a studio, then we can work on them, get it how you want them. And Paul tries to... I think for us, it probably comes off pretty condescending, but I think what Paul is saying, and I also think the way that George is interpreting this is actually quite positive. He's trying to cheer George up, look on the bright side. He says, but look, George, last year you were telling me that you can do anything you want, Paul. Anything you desire, you can do, you know. George, yeah, Paul, but these days you're saying before the show is finished and before we've done it, we're not going to be able to do it, you know. They're the songs going to come out a compromise. Now, I don't think that. I really don't. I really think we're very good and we can get it together. If we think we want to do these songs great, we can just do it great, you know, but thinking it's not going to come out great won't help. He says, the power of positive thinking, George. It's like the secret. Let's manifest. I wrote this about this conversation that we just overwent. What was that? Went over. What's interesting to me is when MLH is asking them about how they're feeling and trying to get the vibes on how the event is coming along. When MLH starts asking them questions, Paul and George do start communicating their feelings immediately. They're talking about how they've been in a dark place, how they need to cheer it up, and how they've been negative. Ringo isn't saying anything. My belief is that Ringo wouldn't say anything with all these cameras and extra people around. Ringo is the only one, in spite of sometimes being drunk, who has... during this time. He's actually, I think, relatively sober. He wasn't usually, I should mention this, while John did come into this particular project pretty often high, and they did smoke weed while working, and they had casual drinks. Ringo wasn't getting wasted during this. Ringo saved getting wasted for after the party. He would go home and drink. He would drink casually, didn't have the shakes or anything as far as I know. I mean, he was beaten. Ringo wasn't off his rocker, out of his mind, and he insists throughout most of his interviews, they kind of saved the fun, work first, play later, which is kind of how Lars operates. We work hard and then we have fun later. Ringo is the one, in spite of sometimes being drunk during this project, who has a foot on the ground. He knows that people are listening and he's not willing to share his thoughts with the world or the staff on hand. And once again, in my interpretation, I say this all the time, he's not going to expose any problems the other Beatles have in what they are going through to the world. I believe Ringo acts quite often out of a place of protecting the other three. Ringo's assertion throughout the decades is that he doesn't remember a lot of this time. First off, that's because people ask Ringo in interviews broad, sweeping questions. They're asking, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. When my voice stops working, it pulls in the vocal cord. I lose all my air and then my eyes start watering. It's very weird. My vocal cords are damaged from years of smoking and singing too much. So don't smoke, kids. Seriously, I mean that so much. I'm glad I don't smoke anymore. Please never, never smoke. Smoking cigarettes is so bad for you. Don't smoke. I mean it. I mean it so badly. Ringo was asked these broad, sweeping questions. What did you think of such and such situation? What did you think of such and such situation? Give us the tea on Paul and John, probably most of the time. If people asked him more specific questions, more thoughtful questions, more research-based questions, questions that I would probably ask him, not to say that I'm awesome, I'm just saying things that you would probably ask him, frankly, if you're here. He might have a real answer, because if you're giving him something thoughtful, Ringo's a very thoughtful, deep thinker. He would stop and think, oh, okay, yeah, I can answer that. Unless if he's being asked something vulnerable for the other Beatles. Because I believe when he's saying, I don't remember that, he's protecting them. He's protecting his boys. He doesn't want to answer our questions because our questions are trying to expose something vulnerable and painful from the other Beatles, and that's not the business Ringo is in. Ringo's in the business of protecting the Beatles because he, in spite of leaving the Beatles during the White Album, has an extremely close relationship with all three of the other Beatles the entire time. He and Paul get into a tiff in 1970. They get it around and have it totally fixed by the next year. Ringo loves them beyond anything. He will forgive them beyond anything, obviously. He forgave George. He forgave George when George went to sue him. I'll put it right here, because I'm using that quote.
What about now? What makes you cross with each other now?
Well, the last time we were cross was when George was suing me. And he didn't like the mix, so he was going to sue me. So in the end, I said, sue me if you want, but I'll always love you.
Hello? Hello? Ringo will not talk during this. And he's not fighting with the Beatles, so he doesn't have a lot to say. And I don't know if he would have a lot to say anyway, because he's not this kind of confrontational guy. But he's not answering these questions. He's not falling for your trick. He is not giving you tabloid fodder. No, absolutely not. And then they go on to have the, we should trespass. I remember the first time I watched this and thought, oh, I love that idea. And they kind of do that. Paul says, the White Album was like this. Michael, what, agony? Paul, well, just the whole idea of, do you want to do it? Do we want to do it? And that's the joke, you see. After it all came about, Neil was saying we'd all phoned him individually, saying things like, can you get them together? Can you get it together? I want to know, what are we doing? Instead of each asking each other, we'd all gone to Neil and asked him, what are the lads doing? But, we should just have it out. We all went to someone else to talk about each other, trying to figure, Neil, can you help me? And Neil is like, yeah, I guess. talk to each other. George says, but we keep coming up against that one. And I keep saying, yeah, well, I'd like to do this and that. I'd like to do this and I'd like to do that and I'd like to do that. And then we end up doing something again that nobody really wants to do. And Paul says, well, then, if this turns into that, it should definitely be the last for all of us because there just isn't any point. So what he's saying, if no one's happy, if you're not happy, we shouldn't do this again because if you're not happy, there's no point. John says, I'm not. George says, yeah, that's it. And Michael says, I think that'd be sad. As an audience, that'd be sad. Paul, of course it is. It's stupid. The people who are being stupid here are the four of us. There's nobody else. George says just being creative instead of being, like in the doldrums, which it always is, Michael, I wrote in my book because I kind of keep a diary of what's going in so I can cut it. And doldrums is the word I used because the doldrums have been coming like to a ship on a...
Well, the Beatles have been in doldrums for at least a year.
Paul, but we haven't played together, you see, that's the fucking thing. But when we come together and play together, we all just sort of talk about the fucking past. We're like old age pensioners. Remember the days when we used to rock, but we're here now and we can do it. All I want to see is some enthusiasm. Mal says, I'd just like to say that you are needed, The Beatles are needed, to so many people. Paul, see, it doesn't matter what's gone wrong. It really doesn't matter it's going wrong as long as the four of us notice it. George, I've noticed it all right. Paul, no, but instead of just noticing it, determining to put it right. That's what I'm on to. George, I think we should have a divorce. He says, I think we should have a divorce. And for some reason, in the captions, it says maybe we should have a divorce.
Maybe we should have a divorce. Well, I said that at the last meeting. But it's getting nearer,
Paul says, well, I said that at the last meeting, It's getting near it. John, and this is the most poignant thing maybe of the whole fucking documentary. Who'd have the children? Paul, Dick James. Gotta take a break and go into my script here. I wrote, and this is something I mentioned a minute ago, but I should probably interject here and say that it's not all Paul causing a major rift here. John is a major contributing factor as well. But John was smart enough or lucky enough to not get most of his poorly constructed arguments on camera. It's likely that's because he was the flakiest during the Twickenham section of the Get Back filming, and by the time they get into the Apple studios, they're not arguing like this. Paul is stressed out and concerned about the show mostly during the Apple Studios section, but they're not arguing. It's not an argument. It's like they're on point at this point. George Martin says, Paul was trying to keep things together by bossing people around because he's quite good at that, but John and George didn't like it at all. John was being more difficult because he was always with Yoko and he would turn up very late or not at all, and it got into an awkward circumstances. John was going through a very problematic period when we were making the record. He actually said to me, I don't want any of your production shit. We want this to be an honest album. And I said, what do you mean by an honest album? And he said, I don't want any editing. I don't want any overdubbing. It's got to be like it is. We just record the song and that's it. I answered, okay, if that's the way you want to do it, that's what we'll do. We would start a track and it wasn't quite right and we would do it again and again.
What are you going to do? Play it again?
Sing a bit.
Do another one? Yeah.
Well, tell us if you think we've got it,
Well, yeah.
Let's keep doing it and then, because we keep doing that and going in and then say no.
Do you want to do it once more then?
Yes.
And then I get to take 19. Well, John, the bass wasn't as good as it was on take 17, but the voice was pretty good, so let's go on again. Take 43. Well, yes, so you go on forever because it was never perfect and it got very tedious. Let's take a moment to look at the orphanage conversation. I'm not going to read it from the script because you need to see John for this. At least you need to see the part that I'm talking about. During this particular conversation, John is clearly out of it. I think this is one of the most obvious moments of John being high on camera. He's not really nodding out, but there are moments where he's trying to pull himself up into this conversation. It's one of those rare moments Yoko isn't right next to him, but that doesn't really matter because John isn't there anyway. I think he's, when he's playing while they're talking, all of them do this. They kind of absent-mindedly play. You can see Ringo tapping his hands a lot of times, just like during interviews and stuff, tapping his feet. This is also in the Aspel interview. They ask, what are you tapping to? And Ringo goes, my heartbeat. And George is like, he's always doing that.
Well, that would cure it, I suppose. Let me set the record straight, though, about...
This is George.
He's a drummer. He's a drummer.
It happens all the time. Am I making a noise on the mic? I tap all the time to my heartbeat.
Like they're always they're autistic, I guess. Like they're stimming, you know? So, but I think part of this right now, John is the only one I think playing during this moment. I think he's like, if I keep playing, I can sober up. I can pull myself up into this conversation. In spite of the two junkies interview that we can see, this to me is one of the hardest moments of watching John, because he's just really, that's not John. Stop crying, bitch. That's not John. Yoko doesn't have to be right next to him, because that's not John. That's somebody else. He's lost his spark. It's not lost on me that MLH dismisses himself from this conversation by saying, shall we let you play?
We all need you. And you know, if you all can't get it together, that's really very sad. So I think what we should do now is let you play a little, and then you all have lunch together. So should we leave you for a while? I mean, if you guys...
These guys can get on the same page by playing music together. It's the only way, especially at this point, that they can really get it back together. And that's why I said it was so damaging that they're having a hard time getting it back together. Here's Jeff Emmerich talking about the White Album. This is one of my favorite quotes regarding the Beatles entirely. And you guys know how much reading I do. This is one of my favorite quotes ever. I've read 117 Beatle books, probably 80 of them front to back. This is my favorite quote ever. Jeff says, interestingly, all the bad feelings of the past weeks seemed to evaporate as soon as they gathered around the mic and I fed tape echo into their headphones. That's all it took for them to suspend their petty disagreements for those few moments. They would... Shit. Okay, Lars, come on. They would clown around and act silly again, like they did when they were kids, just starting out. Then as soon as they'd take the cans off, they'd go back to hating each other. It was very odd. It was almost as if having the headphones on and hearing that echo put them in a dreamlike state. This is so difficult because I really do feel like this is such a very covered, saturated, we see so much of the Beatles. There's such a good examination into humanity. It's never black and white, and it's difficult because there are moments where you're like, you know, in divorce or something, or big breakups. There are moments when you're like, oh shit, this is why I love you so much. Fuck. How can I leave it when it's like this? Because it's this. I remember why I love you. Fuck! Those good times are so good! During Maxwell's Silver Hammer, Paul has this moment with George doing mouth clicks. You have to really pay attention because these minutes are so few and far between, but that's it. That love is still there.
Was that? Was that you? Yeah, all right. Keep it in.
Wednesday, January 8th, 1969, the actual fight isn't even my least favorite part of Get Back. George, Paul, Ringo, and Michael Lindsay-Hogg are all sitting around and talking about the previous evening's TV programming, a sci-fi bit, in a waltz scene. George then starts playing I Me Mine. Because it was structured on the waltz, that's what inspired the bit of the song. Paul is interested in it. He looks at the lyrics. George is asking about the grammar.
It's lovely.
And Paul is legitimately excited about this song. He's not shrugging it off. Just shortly after, John comes in. Once again, Lennon's late again. He hears the song and starts kind of mocking George's song. Ba-bom, 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 ba-bom. This is when you see Paul joining in a little bit. Now, he's laughing. But Paul is almost half-heartedly engaging. John continues, making fun of the song. George says,
I don't care if you don't want it. I don't give a fuck. It's going to be musical.
After George stops playing, John says, George, have you any idea what we play? And later that day, when the band practices I Me Mine, John doesn't play with them. He dances with Yoko. I think that speaks volumes. Paul looks a little offended and put off by this while they're playing the song. I think George took note, and afterward George is once again conciliatory, saying, you should do that during the show.
Do you want to do that once on the show? That'd be great, because it's so simple to do.
But he noticed. John says, by the time the Beatles were at their peak, we were cutting each other down to size. We were limiting our capacity to write and perform by having it fit into some kind of format, and that's why it caused trouble. It's not that we didn't like each other. I've compared it to a marriage a million times, and I hope it's understandable for people that aren't married or in any relationship. It was a long relationship. It started out many, many years before the American public or the English public knew us. Paul and I were together since he was 15 and I was 16. It's a long, long time that the four of us have been together. And what happened was, through boredom and too much of everything, Epstein was dead and people were bothering us with business.
The whole pressure of it finally got to us. So instead of, like people do when they're together, they start picking on each other. It was like, it's because of you'd got the tambourine wrong that my whole life is a misery. It became petty, but the manifestations were on each other because we were the only ones we had.
Maybe it was the camera of Let It Be, the idea that we were going to try and create something phony. The camera went on, and it almost happened in Magical Mystery Tour, but we'd managed to just pick a little magic out. By the time we got to Let It Be, we couldn't play the game anymore. We could see through each other, and therefore we felt uncomfortable, because up till then, we really believed intensely in what we were doing and the product we put out, and everything had to just be right. And we believed. Suddenly, we didn't believe. It'd come to a point where it was no longer creating magic. George, have you any idea what we play? And then when they're actually playing it, he's dancing with Yoko. I'm sure this is one of those things Lewison would say that I'm reading wrong. But he also claimed that John wasn't addicted to heroin. So that's a thing.
They sell boots that high, but not that tight, and not particularly leather, maybe softer. Groovy ones, like, those Afghan coats they all had embroidered. I got boots like that, but the slippers feel at home. Yeah. And it is great.
Well, I've got boots
just
of
tuck
those.
your pants in.
You want boots of those?
Yeah.
I've got boots of those.
You ache. You ache all over. You are aching to be you, but you're scared of what it means to do so. Caleb Nelson.
Have you? Yeah. Do you know where you get them?
Yeah, you get them off me. I've got the merchandising rights, haven't I, boy? I'll give you them. I never wear them.
Do you want to hear the song I wrote last night?
Yeah.
It's nice. It's just a very short one. It's called I Me Mine.
Looking good. Just editing marathon here. We're seeing these moments of absolute loving sincerity between George and Paul, these two that really had a hard time getting along. I know the thing that bothered George the most in the later years, when he was trying to convey to the press, guys, we don't hate each other. You guys are obsessed with making us hate each other. You guys are always saying, well, you guys are always making it up. He put it in his song, When We Was Fab. These are the things that were really bothering George. So I would be remiss to say that there is this story that when George says, well, I don't give a fuck if we use my songs at all, I'll have it in me musical, and that this quote was directed at Paul, but it wasn't. This quote was conveyed to John, as we just saw. The conversation with Paul and George, as we just saw and as I just harped on, was a really loving kind of cuddly brother moment. But that's not what you hear about. That's not what we talk about. Why are we so fucking hellbent on misunderstanding their love for each other? Why are we so unwilling to re-examine and edit the story and add a correction to say, hey, this was wrong all this time. That's not what happened that time. Sure, they were fighting, they were bickering throughout this, but do we need to pile on? Do we need to add yet another tense moment between the two of them? If you wanted to use those moments to say, this is representative of how they were interacting during that time, it is and it isn't, because what was representative of how they were interacting with the bickering and the problems was when they were trying to communicate over music, which is actually kind of worse than George saying, I don't care if we use the song or not, because if they can't communicate on how to put the song together, they have no way to sort out their issues, because that's the only way that they sort out their issues. So after this, the boys sit down and they're weird makeshift recording area, and they start going through the list of songs that they have. And Paul says, okay. And John says, fine, thanks. There's something going on with John, but we don't see it other than Queen says no to pot-smoking FBI members. So George goes off on the list, and Paul says, okay. John, fine, thanks. Paul, just drop it. John, go on, Harrison. Okay, lift us out of this mire. 2 days before George leaves. But, I mean, Paul, once again, I said he's terrified. He's saying, we're going to be faced with a crisis, you know. When I'm up against the wall, Paul, you'll find I'm at my best. Yeah, I know, John, but I just wish you'd come up with the goods. Well, look, I think I've got Sunday off. Yeah, well, I hope you can deliver. I'm hoping for a little rock and roller. Yeah, I was hoping for the same thing myself, you know. He's saying, we're going to be faced with a crisis. I hope you can deliver. And John's saying, I don't have any songs, but I've got Sunday off. I'll make it work. This is Wednesday. I don't think that they're listening to a fucking word George is saying. I'm reading these conversations. I'll flash them up on screen real quick, and you can pause if you want to read the whole thing. But it's those conversations that they're having around the piano, talking about the QE2. Should we take a cruise ship? And George is saying, why would I want to go? Like, I would rather get this over with and then go.
It's gonna be great. You love the place. I may love the place, but I'd rather do the show and then go and love the place.
On vacation, okay? Michael's saying, well, hey, you might really like this. Dennis says, you will love this. Michael, just say yes, just say yes. And then Ringo, who has said over and over and over again, I don't want to go anywhere. We're not going anywhere. I'm only going if I get to go on Peter Sellers' yacht. Thank you very much. He didn't say that, but like, obviously. And George says, I may love the place, but I'd rather do the show and then go love the place. I just want to get it over with. John is agreeing with Michael. He's saying it'll just take all the weight off of what you do with the show. That's the end of it. Like, so we don't have to stress about some gimmick with the show. And Ringo says, but I still don't think, you know, that's 100% sure that wherever we go, that'll make the show. He's like, we don't have to have the location. We're the fucking Beatles, dog. Like, we don't need a fancy place. We're the Beatles. Have you met us? Oh, look at him. Look at him. In spite of everything that he's going through, in spite of his moments of not really being there, isn't he beautiful? I'm not even like really, you guys know this, I say it all the time. I'm not like sexually or romantically attracted to the Beatles. I just find them to be beautiful people. In spite of all their flaws, I think that's actually what makes them quite beautiful people. We know so much about them, and we still love them. Isn't that wonderful? We are at the point of no return.
Having a great time, and for me to come back into the winter of discontent with the Beatles in Twickenham was very unhealthy and unhappy.
Very unhealthy and unhappy, but I can remember feeling quite optimistic about it.
But it soon became apparent that it wasn't anything new. It was just going to be painful again.
There was a lot of trivia and games being played. As everyone knows, we never had much privacy, and now they were filming us rehearsing. One day there was a row going on between Paul and me, and it's actually in the film, blah, 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 blah. We're going to go over this in a little bit. They were filming us having a row. It never came to blows, but I thought
I'm quite capable of being relatively happy on my own, and I'm not able to be happy in this situation. You know, I'm getting out of here.
We would get a bit testy with each other. It was like a marriage. You know, you love each other, but you're getting fed up. But then we'd solve it, and we'd get friends. We'd realise we loved each other, and it was all cool. But then we'd argue again, you know.
Everybody had gone through that. Ringo left at one point. I know John wanted out. It was a very, very difficult, stressful time. And being filmed having a row as well was terrible. I got up and thought, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm out of here. So I got my guitar, went home, and that afternoon wrote Wah Wah. It is January 10th, 1969. Not only have things become extremely tense, but Dick James is there, the owner of Northern Songs, the one who has taken away the rights to half the Beatles' music. The boys don't like him. Paul and John have been slighted by him. And in addition, Ringo is sitting there, and when George shows up, he goes,
Would you like to see what you have half of a percent of?
So it's not a great start to the morning. So there really isn't some defining fight that we truly see here. And that's what's so interesting is that it starts with Dick James being there, and then they're talking about I've Got a Feeling. John and Paul are talking about the black bags and white bags. And then it says, the band work on Get Back, which is still at an early stage without clear lyrics and yet to acquire its shuffling rhythm. George, do you want me to accentuate the beat of the drum? Yeah, see, the thing is, though, just for the three of us, that's good enough for the rock and roll thing. But then, George says, you need Eric Clapton playing on top of it. Paul, no, you don't. You need John, you need George Harrison.
Eric Clapton? No, you don't. You need
You need George Harrison.
You need George Harrison. Yeah, but just doing simple things until it's your go. Because I'm trying to sing louder to get over the guitar now.
Well, really, you only need one
it should
guitar.
all sort of go.
And then Paul amends what he's saying, because he wasn't going to say that. He says, you need George Harrison, but just doing simple things until it's your go, because, otherwise you get the guitar conflicting with what you're singing and all that. George, yeah. And then I'm trying to sing it louder to get over the guitar, but it should also go, George, well, really, you only need one guitar. Paul, yeah, but if you do the burr with Ringo, then you've got a little bit more of the get back burr. And I don't actually see it in here, but we do see it in the documentary where Paul is saying we should get away from that. We should get away from the dunna, nah. And George is like, get away from that. I thought that this was all what the song is.
Yeah, but it's all right. I mean, but we should try and get away from get back.
Get away from that.
No,
that's what it is.
Yeah, but I know. I mean, just get away from the way.
I still don't really understand exactly. I think Paul is trying to say, let's not make that a punctuation. Let's just make it kind of try to blend. But he's not explaining this well. George is already tense and upset, and Paul is not catching it at all. He's probably just thinking, this is another day of me ribbing and picking at George. But for my part, it was just enthusiasm, and I'd sit and talk with the director. But I think it led to a couple of barneys, and in one of them, George said, right, I'm not having this. I think I was probably suggesting what he might play, which is always a tricky one in a band. And he goes on to talk about Hey Jude. In a group, it's democratic, and he didn't have to listen to me, so I think he got pissed off with me coming on with ideas all the time. I think to his mind, it was probably me trying to dominate. It wasn't what I was trying to do, but that was how it seemed. This is a different moment. And he says, I'm thinking of the big lead guitarist. The imitation that Paul does is a stupid oaf.
Like that. It's like the big soft lead guitarist, who just stands there and just...
Little soft.
Well, no, with the big one in the head, where he just sort of goes...
And George is like, little lead guitarist. Paul is like, no, but in my head, I'm thinking of this example. But what it comes off as, I think, to George, this is my interpretation, is that Paul is saying, well, you're a lead guitarist, so you're dumb. Paul isn't saying that. He's like, I don't want to do it like this. George is like, well, it is. The song is legitimately based off of that. Get back, get back. This is part of the song, so what the fuck are you talking about? But then we see them working on Two of Us, and there's a lot of moments where Paul and John are playing. They're having fun. They're kind of goofing around. And then we don't actually see their conversations in Get Back, but it's so funny because you know what's happening here. Paul is talking at John. John's taking it very well this time. He's like, okay, and then they go back into goofing around, and then Paul is talking at John, and George's face is, well, I mean, George makes a lot of sour faces. This is his specialty, I think, but it's kind of heartbreaking.
That's it, it'll get, well, isn't it?
And he's saying,
I think I'll be leaving the band now.
When?
Now.
And it says, sound of riff guitar from Chuck Berry's I'm Talking About You. I think for a lot of fans, we've now been absolutely traumatized by bump, bump, banana.
In fact, maybe you shouldn't both do that.
Bump, bump, banana. The tape resumes. George says, a replacement right into the NME to get a few people. Can you imagine writing into the New Musical Express asking to replace George Harrison? is crazy. He just wants and thinks that just a regular session musician, regular Joe Schmo, can replace him. Is that what he thinks of himself? Is that what he thinks the Beatles think of him? Is that what he thinks the music that the Beatles are producing would only need? His self-esteem while in this situation is not high, or his esteem with the work he's doing while he's with them is not high. Mal says, I'll ask George Martin to see about paying residuals, meaning, okay, fine, I'll see what we can do. George, yeah, but he shouldn't be bothered with that, you know. That's why we've got Apple, so that we can attend to it ourselves. Mal says, yeah. And John says, we aim to please. George says, do you know whose case this is? Mal says, whose case is this, Kevin? Tony says, are you still turning? An unidentified voice says, cut.
Yes?
There's a couple things that I take away from this. This is an extremely serious conversation, but George is already gone. Like, he's like, I'm not, do you know whose case this is? I'm getting ready to go. And John is saying, we aim to please. If I make some funny little quip and make light of this situation, maybe I can normalize it. Maybe this is just another conversation of one of us talking about we should have a divorce. Maybe I'm going to make George feel better. And then George leaves. So a couple of things that I will read about this moment afterward, but I want to make a few things clear. So a couple of things that I will read about this moment afterward, but I want to make a few things clear. We see a lot of fights between Paul and George. I've already covered this, but during this lunchtime, John and George have the fight. This is the big fight. George has already said, I'm leaving, but they have the big fight. And that's when George says, see you around the clubs. See you later. Bye. He doesn't come back. So at this point, I don't know if they were already wasted during the fight, but when they come, meaning John and Yoko, Paul and Ringo come back to Twickenham, they're all wasted. He says, I'm so pissed. Not pissed off Americans, pissed. Drunk. They're all wasted. I don't know if Yoko's wasted, but probably at least a little wasted. And the three of them plus Yoko are jamming out. It looks like they're happy, but they're not happy. They're spiraling. They are trying to cope. Let's not put some sort of happy emotion on it. At least not for John, Paul, and Ringo. I'm not going to put a happy emotion on it for them.
January 10th. Got up, went to Twickenham, rehearsed until lunchtime, left the Beatles, went home, and in the evening did King of Fur at Trident Studios.
The intensity that they had together must have had its limits, and it had to explode at some point. Now they were out in London, travelling a lot, and having different people influence them. So coming back together, it didn't work as well.
I read from Barry Miles, Paul McCartney, many years from now. It was much too soon. They were all exhausted from 5 months of recording the White Album, and they had also all spent studio time working on Apple projects with James Taylor, Mary Hopkin, Jackie Lomax, and George's Wonderwall music. To begin recording again after only 11 weeks, it wasn't even that much respite, was a big mistake. The problems created during the White Album had not gone away or even been addressed. The cameras were instructed to roll at all times to record the between-take conversations and provide a mass of footage from which to choose in the editing stages. The Beatles jammed their way through more than 100 songs, sometimes making them up on the spot, such as Susie Parker, but mostly playing old Beatles numbers, children's nursery songs, parts of their old Hamburg and Cavern Club repertoire, or pub standards. The problem was that they hadn't played live in years and were extremely rusty. The rehearsal tapes are terrible. The group is ragged and out of tune and stays that way. The differences were exacerbated by having to work film industry schedules, which meant a morning call from Mal at 8:30 a.m. It was a horrible experience for them all. John described it to Jan Winter. I was stoned all the time, and I didn't give a shit. We couldn't get into it. It was a dreadful, dreadful feeling in Twickenham studio, being filmed all the time, you know? I just wanted them to go away, and we'd be there at 8 in the morning. That's not true. It was 10 or 11 for the Beatles call time, but Mal was waking them up at 8 a.m. For my White Album timeline, I didn't have their recording time on paper when they actually showed up. The studio book time for the White Album sessions was 2:30 to 10:30 p.m. That's when Ringo showed up. We've talked about this. But generally, they showed up between like 4 and 7 p.m. They worked until 3 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m. They were working until a couple hours before. They're waking up now, just months later. They're trying to switch their sleep schedule. I don't know how to explain this to you as a person who struggles with a lot of insomnia. Changing a sleep schedule is like extremely hard. It sounds so stupid. It should be easy. My partner works seconds, gets home around like 2 a.m. every night. And I try to get up by like 10 a.m. So I don't have it looking like this. It's so I can have the fun little rainbow of my pride flags coming through the window and stuff like that. I try to get up during the human times. But if I don't stay up until 5 a.m. sometimes, I don't see my partner. Do you know how hard it is to regularly operate on weird sleep schedules? It's hard to switch your sleep schedule. And plus, the Beatles, since they stopped like touring, this was their regular sleep schedule. They work late. So this is just an additional thing on top of them all kind of struggling with substance abuse at this point, like all four of them. They were all kind of struggling. I don't know how much George was struggling in comparison, but Paul was drinking a lot. Ringo was drinking a lot. John was doing heroin. George was doing whatever the fuck he was doing, meditating all the time. I don't know. But he was obviously, I just read about, or do read about him having sleep issues during this. He was having problems sleeping. This is on top of like a physically stressful situation, on top of everything that they're going through. And I don't feel like we talk about this. Or I haven't talked about this. I've failed to talk about this. So anyway, that was not their only problem. The rehearsal film shows palpable tension in the air as George, Paul, and Ringo attempt to run through a song while Yoko distracts John by kissing him or whispering in his ear. It was virtually impossible for the cameras to get a shot of the four of them without Yoko. It was hardly an unreasonable request when they asked John if she could be less intrusive. It is not as if he would have tolerated such behavior from any of them. And to mention that I've read where people say, well, Linda was there. Linda observed, but she was off to the side where the other staff was. The people who were close to them were the other engineers, Mal, but Linda was off to the side. She wasn't sitting next to them. And I think that that's noteworthy. You guys, please don't take my only criticisms of Yoko in a vacuum here. If you would like to know more about some of my feelings toward Yoko, well, you'd have to ask me day by day. But I think the best explanation of where I fall on Yoko is all the stuff that I covered in my White Album video. She has an entire chapter. It's called Woman, and there are 3 sections of it. It talks about heroin, her presence in studio, and racism and sexism, and why those things do exist and do not excuse the bad things she's done. So we can't ignore the racism and sexism. Don't you dare f***ing do that. It existed. It was very real. And I talk about all of the bad examples, including the sources talking about when Paul, Ringo, and George were racist. I talk about the very few ones we have because lots of people try to act like it didn't happen, but it did. And then we talk about the things that she did wrong. All of those things exist because, like I say, black and white, shades of gray. So when I'm talking, Yoko shouldn't have been this close. They were filming a documentary about the Beatles, not the Beatles and Yoko. During one of the confrontations after George leaves the band, several times during this conversation, George says, I need her to leave. I need to talk to you without her. And John acts like, he's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? He acts like it's nonsense or it's gibberish. Like he acts like he doesn't make sense that he's asking it. He doesn't even say, well, no, she's staying with me because these are my arguments. He's just, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And George is like, I need to talk to you, just the 4 of us. And he's like, what do you mean? What? Please. Okay, anyway, back to this. It is not as if he would have tolerated such behavior from any of them, but John was so besotted that he didn't see it that way. He couldn't see that he was breaking up the group. And it wasn't just John, there are multiple wedges here. He told Rolling Stone, they were writing about her looking miserable and let it be. You sit through 60 sessions with the most big-headed, uptight people on earth and see what it's fucking like and be insulted just because you love someone. And George insulted her right to her face at the Apple office at the beginning, just being straightforward, you know. Well, I'm gonna be upfront because that's what I've heard, and Dylan and a few other people say she's got a lousy name in New York and you give off bad vibes. That's what George said to her, and we both sat through it, and I didn't hit him. I don't know why. Yoko does, in fact, smile smile in the Let It Be footage during rehearsals on the day George walked out. George had never been keen on the project, and the film clearly shows the tense atmosphere between him and Paul, with George visibly irritated at being told how to play his solo. However, it was a blazing argument between George and John just before lunch on January 10th that caused George to leave. "See you around the clubs," he told the others before leaving the studio and driving home to Esher. Without speaking, Paul, John, and Ringo returned to their instruments after lunch. Yoko symbolically settled herself down on George's now vacant blue cushion and began wailing. The remaining Beatles joined in as her backing group, Paul rubbing his bass against the amplifier speaker to create feedback, John with full feedback banging the back of his guitar to create surges of noise and working his way through the Pete Townsend and Jimi Hendrix Guitar Hero feedback stances, Ringo rolling and thrashing his kit. Yoko played air, as John called it. She ululated, screeched, and warbled in a vocal version of the controlled shrieks of Albert Ayler or John Tadchai. I tried to find the pronunciation of this and couldn't. The camera moved in for a close-up of her beatific smile. It is hard to believe that Yoko was unaware of how intrusive her presence was, but as John Lennon explained it to Andy Peebles of the BBC, Yoko naively believed that the Beatles would happily admit her as a fellow musician to play along with them, even though she claimed never to have heard of them before she met John and had no background. That's not true. You could not make me believe that. Everyone knows the Beatles. She lived in New York fucking City. She knew who the Beatles were. I'm not saying she listened to them. I don't know if she was a fan, but she stalked John. She stalked all three Beatles. She didn't get to Ringo. She didn't get around to him before she already found John. She knew who John was. That's one that I'm like, stop it. And had no background in rock and roll. John says, there were a couple of jam sessions in Let It Be with Yoko and the Beatles playing, but they never got it in the movie, of course. She just wanted to join in everything. John, on a different occasion, said Yoko sees men as assistants. In the belief among time at Apple staff was that Yoko simply saw the Beatles as a way of launching her own career. The next day was a Saturday. No one expected George to reappear, and he didn't. The following Wednesday, there was a long meeting in which George outlined his condition for staying in the Beatles. No more filming at Twickenham, no concert in Tripoli, no television show, and the songs they had rehearsed to be used in a new album to be recorded at the studio that Magic Alex was building for them in the basement of Apple. They all agreed.
But the thing about Sir Frank, with his advice like, scan not a friend with microscopic glass, I mean, that helped me actively to ease up on whomsoever I thought I loved. Gave me to be more forgiving.
Do you understand the violence it took to be this gentle? Nitya Prakash. Some of the stuff I read, a lot of stuff I read, will be a little repetitive of what I just read, but it's kind of important because some of the stuff I'm reading, a lot of the stuff I'm reading is from George's accounts. That's from a Paul book, featuring heavily in quotes from John's feelings. This is from I Me Mine, George's biography. Look at this, guys. I need to fix that. But, I mean, it's an old book, but I've read it too many times. Okay, George wrote, Wah Wah was written during the Let It Be fiasco, which began with the rehearsal of songs that ended up as the movie Let It Be. We had been away from each other after having a very difficult time recording the White Album. That double album was so long, it went on forever. And there were all kinds of other bullshit things happening in the band, the pressures and the problems, and after that we came back from a holiday and went straight back into the old routine. It is that concept of how everybody sees and treats everybody else, allowing no consideration for the fact we are all changing all the time. I remember Paul and I were trying to have an argument and the crew carried on filming and recording us. Anyway, after one of those first mornings, I couldn't stand it. I decided this is it. It's not fun anymore. It's very unhappy being in this band. It's a lot of crap, thank you. I'm leaving. Wah Wah was a headache as well as a foot pedal. It was written during the time in the film where John and Yoko were freaking out screaming. I'd left the band, gone home, and wrote this tune. Perhaps it's because of the note of Paul and I were having an argument that makes this a Paul diss track. The original lyrics that we see written here, it's on screen, but the contrast is bad, so I'm reading it from the book. Wah Wah. You've given me a wah wah, so I'm thinking of you and different things I must do. You made me such a big star, being there at the right time, cheaper than a dime. So I'm thinking of you and different things I must do. You've given me a wah wah, which is kind of meaning like You've given me an ouchie. You're being a pain in the ass. So I'm thinking about you and how I can't do this anymore. The final lyrics are, fuck. You've given me a wah-wah. And I'm thinking of you and all the things that we used to do. You made me such a big star, being there at the right time, cheaper than a dime. You don't see me crying. You don't hear me sighing. I don't need no wah-wah. And I know how sweet life can be if I keep myself free of wah-wah. This song is so promoted as the conversation around how George felt toward the Beatles, this anger, this anguish, right? But right next to this is Beware of Darkness. So I just wanted to interrupt and say, George doesn't say Beware of Darkness is about the Beatles. Listen to the fucking lyrics to this song. Watch out now, take care. Beware of falling swingers dropping all around you. The pain that often mingles in your fingertips. Beware of darkness. Watch out now, take care. Beware the thoughts that linger, winding up inside your head, the hopelessness around you in the dead of night. Beware of sadness. It can hit you. It can hurt you, make you sore, and what is more, that it is not what you are here for. Watch out now, take care, beware of shoe shufflers dancing down the sidewalks as each unconscious sufferer wanders aimlessly. Beware of Maya. Watch out now, take care, beware of greedy leaders. They'll take you where you should not go. While weeping adless cedars, they just want to grow and grow. Beware of darkness. Beware of these thoughts of just being a lead guitarist, the big lead guitarist. Beware of the people in Apple Corps, these thoughtless leaders that are taking your money, shoe shufflers. All of these people crowding our office. Beware of falling swingers. Beware of the hopelessness around you in the dead of night. It can hit you. It can hurt you, make you sore, and what is more, that is not what you are here for. I'm searching for God. I'm searching for spiritual help. I'm searching. This is not what I'm here for. Why does this hurt so bad? Run away from this darkness. You could not convince me that there is no fucking symbolism to that song. Isn't It a Pity is kind of more accepted as this is probably about the Beatles, showing some sort of remorse about how the relationship was falling out, and George writes in I Me Mine, Isn't It a Pity is about whenever a relationship hits a down point, instead of whatever other people do, like breaking each other's jaws, I wrote a song. It was a chance to realize that if I felt somebody had let me down, then there's a good chance that I was letting someone else down. We all tend to break each other's hearts, taking and not giving back. Isn't it a pity? Isn't it a pity? Isn't it a shame how we break each other's hearts and cause each other pain? How we take each other's love without thinking anymore? Forgotten to give back. Oh, isn't it a pity? Some things take so long, but how do I explain when not too many people can see we're all the same, and because of all their tears, their eyes can't hope to see the beauty that surrounds them. Isn't it a pity? Finally, the song that I really think is about the Beatles, even though it was originally written for Billy Preston. What I feel I can't say, but my love is there for you any time of day. But if it's not love that you need, then I'll try my best to make everything succeed. And tell me, what is life without your love? Tell me, who am I without you by my side? What I know I can do if I give my love to everyone like you. But if it's not love that you need, Jesus Christ. Sometimes I wonder if other people stop and see this, because there's so much hatred toward Paul from the George narrative. I'm like, George, do you even hear your own songs? Please tell me that you're not seeing the pattern here. I know you're searching for God. Everybody needs to find their purpose, right? But whatever. Here's Patty. Patty talks about returning from India and George being depressed, which was a new development. In turn, for many reasons, she was also depressed and suicidal. During the first week and change of the Let It Be filming, Patty and George were temporarily separated. Eric Clapton had been dating a French girl Why do I keep forgetting her name? It's like her name is Charlotte Martin. Go ahead and pause on screen to read a little snippet from They May Be Parted about the situation. Melissa or Michelle or something. He discarded, and George, in front of Patty, scooped her up during a New Year's Eve party. So Patty went to stay with her friends. In her book, she claims that when George left the Beatles, the altercation came to blows. She wasn't there, and she's obviously incorrect. George denies this, John denies this, Paul denies this, Mal denies this. Ringo obviously denies this. Nobody ever asked Ringo. Nobody cares about Ringo.
And it says, but it wasn't the first time they traded a few punches. Yeah, because there's nothing to it except that it's a lie.
What about the fisticuffs?
Yeah, none of that.
It didn't take place, huh?
He said it did. It's never got to that, except for a place of dinner in Hamburg.
I would like to mention that she had a co-writer, Penny Junior, or Journer. I can never say that last name. And it's likely when the book was published, this fight fell under the public opinion, and it certainly makes a more interesting storyline. What I do find to be quite credible here is Patty's interpretation of George's mood, because she was there for this. George's moods, I think, had much to do with what was going on between the Beatles. After Brian Epstein's death, they were like orphans, so underlying tensions and resentments began to surface. George felt excluded. John and Paul had always been the songwriters, and he had had to fight to get any of his songs onto an album. As he became older and more confident about his talent, he recognized how unfair this was, but they were powerful characters. I don't think I knew half of what was going on. George would start to say something about Paul and then stop. He appeared unable or unwilling to share his thoughts with me. He wouldn't tell me he felt left out, although I am sure he did. He kept his hurt, frustration, anger, or whatever it was to himself. We had once been so close, so honest and open with each other. Now a distance had developed between us. At times, I couldn't reach him. I went through quite a few sources to determine exactly what I wanted to keep for this. And for my strictly Beatles stuff, I do get pretty repetitive, and I talked about overusing quotes in my last video about researching the Beatles ethically. After going through about a dozen sources, I already went through these, outside of the actual interviews from George in these documentaries, I found mostly that Alan Clayson sums up Paul's demeanor as in how demeaning he was. Clayson says, "Sooner than either could guess, Paul would inform his solicitor that Harrison had actually quarreled with everybody during these sessions. I doubt that he quarreled with Ringo. George actually appeared to derive supercilious amusement as Ringo ran through his little octopus's garden, and we know that's not true. That's not true. We've seen that, actually. And his frankness about Yoko still rankled with John. That's true. But it was the Beatle he'd known the longest who drove him over the brink. The very first day, Paul went into this, you do this, you do that, don't do this, don't do that. And I thought, Christ, I thought he'd woken up by now. Let It Be contained a scene where Paul and I are having an argument and we're trying to cover it up. Then the next scene, I'm not there." Not knowing why this was, the reviewer for the Morning Star had still been aware of, quote, George Harrison's shut-in expressions, end quote. Up until his temporary disappearance, George's glowering huff at Paul Suttle's harangues had welled into overflowing, "You're so full of shit, man," was his rejoinder to Paul's proposal to play a show amid desert ruins in Tunisia. Clayton goes on to detail some of the information. I'm not sure how helpful it is to reiterate here because contextually, I think I'd be repeating quite a few mistakes and mistruths. But Clayton says, "It took a week for him to up and quit the chilly encampment with Maine's leads fanning out in all direction across the hollow chamber. I didn't care if it was the Beatles," he said. "I was getting out." After slamming his car door in Ken Fond's forecourt, he immediately directed his anger to a creative end. Getting home in the pissed off mood, I wrote Wah Wah. I don't know if the slamming the car door thing is true or not, but I love that visual. A painful pattern that, as a fan, I have a hard time swallowing is the way that George was treated in the studio at large, not just during January 1969. This is from Still the Greatest by Andrew Grant Jackson. Jackson does a really great job of explaining where George was creatively and why the two pillars, John and Paul, were so obnoxious to deal with. And when I call them pillars, when I wrote this, I meant like them having the most songs. I don't think that they were the two pillars that held up the Beatles. The Beatles needed all four pillars.
And I always liken us to like four corners of a square. People say, oh, you know, John was the important, or John and Paul were the important ones, and so. But I say, no. It's a square without any of those corners.
Even though George Martin thinks that it was John and Paul, and then, okay, anyway, fuck off, Lars. You've already said this stuff so many times. Lennon would allow Harrison to weave guitar hooks into his compositions, but McCartney would remove Harrison's guitar solos on songs like Another Girl, Penny Lane, and Hello Goodbye. Throughout the 70s, guitarists for Wings would quit after realizing they would have almost zero input on what they played or did not play, which is fine. McCartney's a musical genius and should be able to hire who he wants to do what he wants. But Harrison didn't need or want to be a faceless session man getting paid on the clock, which is interesting because he just thought we need a session man right into the NME. But if we're going to do the big reading, it's actually going to come from Graeme Thomson because, as usual from Graeme Thomson, read this book. It's extremely well done. He says, that afternoon in the studio, Ono assumed ownership of Harrison's blue cushion and howled into his microphone as the other three Beatles improvised slabs of dissonant noise. You could cut the symbolism with the knife. There was quite a bit of tension from individual members of the band during those rehearsals, says Glenn Johns, the producer of Let It Be. From day one, there was internal stuff going on between them that wasn't sitting comfortably. Things were not normal. It came to a head that day. I don't remember anybody criticizing what George was playing. Okay. Well, actually, when it became apparent that there was going to be a bit of an argument, those of us who weren't actually in the band left the room. It was clear that it would be intrusive for us to remain. So what actually was said and what went on, I don't know, but I do know that George left the band that day. The whole thing was very uncomfortable, and it was very embarrassing for me and others who were not in the band to be close by while this was going on, to have to watch this begin and be there. My voice, in the immediate aftermath. It was very unpleasant, and I felt really awkward. Glenn Johns was a producer and friendly with them, but he wasn't in the close circle of the Beatles. And I just want to mention that typically if there was an argument, Mal could be there. Graeme goes on to write, and I just call him Graeme like we're friends. He goes on to write, he was unhappy, says Boyd. The Beatles made him unhappy. This had gone on for over a year. They could be vicious to each other. This was all really upsetting, and even more so for him because he had discovered this new avenue of life. He would come home from recording or seeing them and be just full of anger, and then he would be cross with himself. It was a very bad state that he was in.
When you glimpse something that you understand, but you can't be there because there's something earthly holding you back, and he was very aware of that.
What were the earthly things that pulled on him the most?
Well, the other three Beatles.
Thomson claims that the Beatles expected George to return immediately, and I've read otherwise in different places, so I think it was a bit of both. From what we see, it's very much up in the air. I don't think they know, but they do anticipate his return to a degree. But I don't think his return was taken for granted, especially after it being so difficult, because they let Ringo have a couple weeks, and then they were like, come on, buddy. They gave Ringo some time to, like, relax. They didn't give George any time. The next day, on the 11th, George got up, had breakfast. John and Yoko diverted me.
January 11th. Got up. John and Yoko came and diverted me at breakfast.
The next morning, they were there. The next morning, he got no time to relax, try to get some perspective, meditate. You know, he had no time to cool off. It's because this was done on a deadline. I'm sure that they would have given him more time, but then again, I'm not sure. But it probably felt a bit disrespectful. It could have felt that way. I don't know if it did or if it didn't, but it could have felt that way. You gave Ringo a minute to chill. Why don't I get my minute to chill? Why don't I get to go on holiday? Where's my yacht, Peter Sellers? Do I need to do a movie with you? Yes. Back to my point. Like I said, this is very ranty. After meetings, phone calls, and secondhand conversations, the 5-hour meeting at Ringo's on January 15th got them all on the same page. But he does say that Derek Taylor, he, meaning Graeme, were besties, that Derek Taylor was the one who reached George. Thomson says, he was persuaded by Derek Taylor that, in light of Lennon's retreat into a heroin daze and Starr's general diffidence, he had a responsibility to help McCartney see the project through. I felt that George's sense of decency could be touched, said Taylor, and it was. Once again, I already read this. George's demands were dropping the extravagant live performance and then going to Apple Studios.
The first track
Phil Spector Wall.
Yeah, well, the first track we ever did, it was this song called Wawa.
This is the difficult part, the hardest part of this entire video. When I'm listening to music, I get about 3 to 5 full seconds of music before Content Daddy swoops in and says, your video is blocked worldwide for copyright infringement. So I have to listen to 3 to 5 seconds of Beatles music and then stop. I will be interrupting myself. While I'm listening to the music, I'll be jamming, enjoying myself. Then I'll stop and give you my interpretation. I'll be cutting in with readings, the readings that I'm doing right now, and other little factoids that I find to give us more of the song. If you want the full song and if you want to be a nice person, get your gold passport to Lars Land. That's at patreon.com/LarsLand. I do semi-weekly song breakdowns that are not just as intense as this, but they're like very reading heavy. They're between like 30 to 50 minutes per song. Pretty much, like I said, semi-weekly. When I'm not working on a video for this, I'm putting out a video for them. There's probably 3 videos a month of some insanity and a lot of insane posts. So if you want heavy music, we listen to several versions of each song, several takes, lots of information that I can give there because Content Daddy doesn't stop me there. Blame Content Daddy. Not me. I didn't choose this. Sometimes also I will speed it up just to give a little bit more of the song because Content Daddy doesn't mind it when it's sped up a little bit more. So don't complain. If you complain about this, that's your fault. Pay attention. I get like 15 seconds of video footage if I cut out all the breaths and stuff. Hard cut into production. I've had a lot of interpretation, inserts, conversation during the story half of this. Now we're in production and I didn't have like any. This is, as we know, the let's listen section. There's none of that interpretation. Like I go, You know, I don't have a lot of little ends. Ooh. This is the Wah Wah Session Outtakes and Jams Take 1 from the All Things Must Pass 50th anniversary release. I don't know if I'm gonna like stop and listen, like if I'm gonna stop and react, so we're just gonna play it and we'll see what happens. For all of this, my bangs got all flippy floppied and I look stupid. We do not need to talk about it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Use a mirror, babe.
We might just be listening for 5 minutes. I might cut this entirely. Who knows? Okay. From Simon Leng, here is our personnel. George Harrison on vocals, electric guitar, slide guitar, backing vocals. Eric Clapton, electric guitar. Billy Preston on piano. Bobby Whitlock, electric piano. Gary Booker, Hammond organ. Pete Ham, acoustic guitar. Tom Evans, acoustic guitar. Joey Moland, acoustic guitar. Klaus Voormann, bass. Ringo Starr, drums. Bobby Keys, saxophone. Jim Price, trumpet, horn arrangement. Mike Gibbons, tambourine, and uncredited maracas/congas. Probably Ringo. Honestly, now that I'm thinking of it, it's probably not Ringo. I just kind of doubt it. Not that it couldn't be, it's just probably not. Anyway, I'm in here to interrupt because I wanted to leave in a little bit more of this, and it's stupid. And it's stupid, and it's stupid, and it's stupid. But, the following information is from the All Things Must Pass archival notes from George Harrison Archive. Archival notes are by Don Fleming and Richard Radford. The session information is based on the original All Things Must Pass production notes, photographs, and reel-to-reel session tapes in the George Harrison Archive. The All Things Must Pass session tapes created in 1970 include 49 1-inch 8-track tapes, 4 2-inch 16-track tapes, and 44 quarter-inch stereo tapes. Over 25 hours of music is documented. The chronology of the making of All Things Must Pass is derived from the engineer's information on the tape boxes. Richard Radford, archivist for the George Harrison Archive since 2006, oversaw the latest preservation of the tape collection. The multi-track and stereo tapes were transferred to digital preservation copies from the original analog tapes by Matthew Cocker, Richard Berry, and Paul Hicks. They began recording this song at Abbey Road in Studio 3 between May 28th and 29th with Phil McDonald and John Leakey engineering. This was produced by Phil Spector and George Harrison. They also, in September, moved to Trident to use their 16-track machines. The engineers there are Ken Scott and Dave C. I do not have Dave C's last name. His little voice. I've worked really hard on this video, and it's something that I think about this relationship with them all the time. And it's scary to share this one. Like, there was this part in the one-hour video where I say, like, I was being so vulnerable, and I said, and that's so scary. And that's kind of how this feels, but it's not scary to be vulnerable as much as I listened to all this stuff when I was on my computer with my headphones, even though my headphone was broken. It's a whole thing. The audio was awful.
It was a very unusual choice, I thought, to work with Phil Spector with the kind of songs you were making on that album.
Yeah, I suppose it was, but he needed a job at the time. And I needed somebody to help me because, after being in a group all the time with a producer, suddenly to be a solo artist with no producer, and no group, it's quite a big jump.
So I had all of these different things, but I didn't have very good commentary anyway. This song goes so hard. And I was like, well, I might as well get dolled up and do it again. So the audio isn't as good as it was. The album sessions began with Wah Wah. To capture the large band on only 8 tracks contains certain choices that had to be made. The drums are carefully submixed from multiple microphones down to just one track. Multiple guitars and keyboards are also blended together onto single tracks to help achieve Spector's wall of sound. Phil McDonald says, in the control room, it was different than the studio. A lot different. Spector had this echo on echo, and there was this massive sound. And when George came in and he said, okay, play it back, Spector turned the volume up to very, very high, loud. And George just sat there, and I thought he was going to turn around and walk out, but he didn't. He said, interesting. And we did it like that in the end, but it was like his jaw dropped when he first heard the playback of what he'd just done. They did 3 takes that day, happy with the result, and they move on to mastering before going on to My Sweet Lord. It's stupid. It's something I bitch about with other people all the time. I feel so possessive about this that I'm just like, I don't want it. I've already put it on my Patreon version, and I'm like, this literally take 1 is crazy. I don't want to finish this. I don't want to send it out. I want it to be mine. Stupid. Because, I know I'm going to get hate on this somehow. Somebody's going to get mad at me, and it's going to be stupid because all I want to do is just love. All I want to do is just love the Beatles. And anyway, I hope that this was enough interruption so I could leave in this fucking part of the song. Hope you're happy editing, Lars. In September, George moves to Trident to use their 16-track machines. Shockingly, Abbey Road is still behind the times. The engineers here are Ken Scott and Dave C. I don't have the last names. I already said that. George said, I took 10 or 11 of the tracks to try in the studio off Wardour Street. I don't know how to say that. Wardour Street. Put them onto 16-track because at that time, Abbey Road only had 8 tracks. It's Wardour, actually. Look at all the Brits who helped me out. Chiswick House traumatized me. Apparently, this is the most traumatizing British pronunciation. I didn't even look it up, but I have like weird, I don't know if you'd call it childhood trauma. I had a mean uncle who was insane about correcting grammar and pronunciation, and it has stuck with me. So I get a lot of pronunciation corrections and I always feel a little prickly about it, but then I have to get better at it. I used to look up a lot of pronunciations and I got kind of lazy, so now I've been kind of trying to get back on my game about it. So anyway, thank you guys for helping me out. It is Wardour Street. Because if you want to hear more about how far behind Abbey Road was, watch my Paperback Rain video. Then we overdubbed the ones that turned into the most noisy tracks on the album, like What Is Life, Let It Down, Awaiting on You All, Wah Wah. All of those that have big noise. So those tracks were done in Trident, mixed in Trident, and the others remained just as 8 tracks. George goes on to layer his own vocals, dubbing them the George Harrison singers in his production notes before becoming the George O'Hara Smith singers in the credits. Ken Scott says George knew what he wanted to do. It was all these massive backing vocals, which were, in the most part, just him. It was putting down a whole bunch of parts, bouncing them to a track, putting down a whole bunch of others, and just piecing together all this amazing music. This is from While My Guitar Gently Weeps by Simon Leng. Leng says, by the time All Things Must Pass was recorded, the X-Fab had been exposed to Southern soul rock. The result was a strong, snarling guitar riff developed from Clapton's Coming Home lick. That's by Delaney and Bonnie, and we'll play it here. So we're going to listen to Coming Home by Delaney and Bonnie because of the inspiration of the riff on Wah Wah. This thing is covered in fur. 3 cats. Anyway, is it weird if I just hold? It's not weird that I hold the keyboard, right? Like, is that whatever? It's too late to care about things being weird. So, just from the Delaney and Bonnie Wikipedia for interruption purposes, this is just the intro. Delaney and Bonnie was an American duo of singer-songwriters Delaney Bramlett and Bonnie Let's do it. Let's fucking go. Honestly, this is kind of a fucking vibe. Honestly, I kind of fuck with this song though. I wasn't gonna listen to the whole thing, but here we are. Delaney Bramlett and Bonnie Bramlett. In 1969 and 1970, they fronted a rock soul ensemble, Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, whose members at different times included Dwayne Allman, Greg Allman. Music is truly just a language. It's a flat circle, and there's never something brand new. It's just new orders. Eric Clapton, George Harrison, Leon Russell, Bobby Whitlock, Dave Mason, Steve Howe, Rita Coolidge, and King Curtis. Hopefully that was helpful. With a virtually identical use of Bobby Keys and Jim Price's horns. Undoubtedly, the rollicking horn chart that lifts this middle 8 would not have happened without Coming Home. This foundation gave Phil Spector room to unleash his full armory of reverb-flooded production values. With the libretto was pure Beatles angst. In retrospect, Harrison came to the conclusion that songs like Wah Wah had been overcooked, a view Klaus Vormann shared. Quote, he knew it was overproduced. If you have all those acoustic guitars on top of each other, it clutters the sound. He knew that. The self-referential nature of many of the solo Beatles songs is unique in pop music. It's as if the Beatles were an everyday fact of life, as much a natural subject for a song as the weather or walking the dog. Such was the celebrity status attached to the group that the public and the media longed for these further installments of the Beatles soap opera. For the record, Wah Wah trashes the roseate memory of the Beatles, who, its third man says, were there at the right time and cheaper than a dime. Wah Wah, in this context, means pain in the butt and is about rejecting the Beatles, the artifice and the pretense. It's a song of anger and alienation, redolent of betrayal and hostility. This is the Concert for Bangladesh version of this song, and I mean, it just like knocks my socks off. They're walking out. Leon Russell, Ringo Starr, Madison Square Garden. This is from the words and music of George Harrison by Ian Inglis. The multi-tracked vocals, prominent percussion, and foregrounded bass section of Wah Wah recall the wall of sound production techniques favored by Spector on the recordings he made with vocal groups such as the Crystals and the Ronettes in the early 1960s. But this is no innocent pop song. And he goes on to tell the story of Wah Wah there. Spector's powerful production may cloak Harrison's words behind the conventions of a hard rock song and conceal the ferocity of his attack, but its forceful rhythm also reflects the monumentum of his anger. In future years, Harrison regularly included Wah Wah in his live performances, not least for its sense of unbridled aggression. Concert for Bangladesh is one of my favorite videos I've ever made. Oh, look at George. So, hands down, the best performance, best version is Wah Wah from the Concert for Bangladesh. 10-minute standing ovation. Here's a fun little note. So when I did my Concert for Bangladesh video, I looked over and over and over on pronunciation because obviously George's song is pronounced Bangladesh. But I hear Bangladesh all the time, so then I looked for the US pronunciation and it was Bangladesh. But my friend and patron, Debesh, actually helped me out on this, so it is Bangladesh.
Yes and no. The way I say, I mean, I'm not from Bangladesh, but I'm from West Bengal, Kolkata, and my family was part of India before the partition, but we say Bangladesh. Native speakers say Bangladesh, whether you're from West Bengal or from Bangladesh, it'll be Bangladesh.
But I still screwed it up during the Let's Listen portion after he sent me this voice memo. So embarrassing. So there's going to be little cut-ins of me going, Bangladesh. So we'll do our best. The Concert of Bangladesh has probably my favorite live performance of Wah Wah. It has some of my favorite performances, period, actually. So we're going to read from Still the Greatest by Andrew Grant Jackson. He says, the live performance of the song on Concert for Bangladesh has the edge. On All Things Must Pass, Spector's monolithic wall of noise stays at the same level throughout the song without any dynamic shifts, as opposed to starting more subtly and building to a crescendo, thus seems overlong. The live version is a notch slower, and the cleaner mix allows breathing room to hear the space between the instruments. Not even crying over the song right now, like the meaning behind the song, George and Paul. Crying at this, holy crap. Why are we always crying? I remember one time I got this comment from my Now and Then video that I was acting. I don't
believe anybody with this hair would be that self-conscious.
Mama, Cindy Lou Who. She came from Whoville to tell them what the tea is.
That I wish I could emotionally regulate myself, that I could be this Oscar worthy. Are you kidding me? Give me an award. But anyway, back to this. Concert for Bangladesh just means so much to me. It's my favorite video. It just means a lot to me. This was George's first time doing a live performance as not a Beatle in front of an actual audience since like '66. It just... Also, like, looking at the way Jesse Ed Davis looks at George, just like it's like his like little face embodies how every Beatles fan feels. Like, I don't know very much about the guy. I just know that I love his work from this day specifically. I need to know more about him. I don't know anything about him. Hope he's a good guy because his little face makes me love him. And more importantly, there's the euphoria of the performance itself. The band included Starr on drums alongside future Wilbury Keltner, Clapton, Russell, Preston, Vorman, and Badfinger. They only had a day's rehearsal, which is not technically true depending on who you're talking about. Like for Clapton, who didn't really rehearse at all, he came the day before. But for Ringo, Leon Russell, Billy Preston, Klaus Vorman, those people were there the entire week. So they had more of a rehearsal time when they were figuring out what songs to use, etc., etc., etc. They only had a day rehearsal with the entire group. I highly doubt that George was thinking about them specifically during this live performance. I'm begging people to understand that when people are performing live, they're usually not thinking about what the song was about when they wrote it. Leon Russell, holy shit. More emotional, slower songs, sure, maybe, but not always. So I don't know if he was thinking about this, but maybe because he and John Lennon had just had a fight days before. So I don't know, maybe. I don't think that George picked this song for a specific reason, for like anything deeper than the fact that he knows it's a bop and that it's really good for having a choir behind him and all these blues vibes. Leon Russell is right there, and it also has the range to hold him, Ringo, Jim Keltner, and Eric Clapton in it. He's grooving. So I don't think that there was like any animosity with him thinking, I'm gonna play Wah Wah at Concert for Bangladesh. It's gonna be totally cool and not petty at all. I don't think it was a moment of petty. I think he was like, shit, it's a bop. See, you've got a whole horn section and then you've got Eric Clapton playing right there. This song is just perfect for this range of people and cast of characters that's on this stage, raising awareness for the need of Bangladesh. But when they launched into the commanding riffs of Wah Wah, Starr kicked in with one of his patented fills, the gospel chorus started clapping, and a serious-looking Harrison leaned into the groove, and 20,000 people roared in delight upon seeing a Beatle for the first time since 1996. Harrison's stoicism belied his nervousness at being the front man for the first time, but by the time the horn section started grooving in step, Harrison did his sideways kick shuffle from the Beatlemania days, and his exhilaration at being free from his domineering ex-bandmates was palpable. Turning around to look at the huge ensemble pulsating all around him, he grinned, singing How Good Life Can Be with no more crying. There's something to be said about pushing that song. The video is 3 minutes and 52 seconds, but the song's shorter than that, versus the actual full length of the song is like 5 minutes, 50 seconds or something. I think it works both ways. Okay, so we're gonna listen just a little bit of the Wah Wah Day 2 demo, take 1, just for a little like shits and gigs. Which sounds pretty nasty. We're not going to listen to the whole song, though. The words and music of George Harrison by Ian Inglis. The song is not an isolated or petulant outburst, but an indication of the way in which all of the songwriters within the Beatles were using their newfound solo status to settle old scores, right perceived wrongs, and question each other's integrity. You give me a wah wah. McCartney's second album, Graeme, released just a few months later, contained 2 songs that were direct attacks on Lennon, Dear Boy and Too Many People. In Lennon's blistering retort, How Do You Sleep, on which Harrison played lead guitar, was included on Imagine. Making an outline for the song, you can hear his like making the rhythm with his strings, like, you know, it's called like placing the dots. That's what it's called, and like, never mind. Nobody cares about your dumb little thing. It's weird because the song is so upbeat, high tempo, high octane. And this still has this nasty guitar, right? But it's very solemn vibes here. I don't have a date on these demos, but I kind of wonder when he made these particularly, because this is very different as far as where we wound up. You made me
such a big star.
90s grunge who? 90s grunge who? 90s grunge where? And so I can imagine that if this was kind of where George was starting, and then you wind up with this wall of sound, I could see why he'd be like, okay, relax. Pixies where? Before we listen to the actual On the Wax song.
What is this vibe? What is it?
I want to play a part or the beginning of the 2014 remaster, and then I'm going to play the 2020 mix all the way through. The 2014 remix, well, you know what, considering the audio issue we're in right now, I think we're actually going to listen to the 2014. I prefer the 2020 mix better with headphones in, but considering we're in this weird audio situation, it might be better. Okay, so just listen to this. Here's the beginning of the 2014. I'm just here so I don't get fined. Okay, I'm just here so I don't get fined because I want to be able to show the differences. I'm not even sure if you can really I can tell. Okay, now here's the beginning of the 2020. Yeah, you can absolutely tell, but it's just, I'm just here so I don't get fined. That's it. That's it. I moved into about 1:26, so you could hear when George is singing, we're in the chorus, so you can hear it in the 2020 mix here. Okay, so I'm gonna skip to like, I'm just here to not get fined. And then we kind of go back to the 2014 mix and you can hear how much louder it is. And see, from this angle, like from listening to this version, I don't like it as much. I prefer I don't like the 2020 as much. I like the 2014 better. But with headphones on, it's a different story. Okay, whatever. Try those with headphones on because it sounds kind of garbagey. My argument makes no sense in this particular situation. Probably makes less sense through the audio situation, right? But in the headphones, headphones over the ear, my friend, it actually sounds a lot better because there's a good separation between all of the instruments. And while I understand that George really wanted that kind of chorus of lots of voices and a really big sound and stuff, it is actually very nice to hear him a little bit separate from that big wall of sound. So I really, really prefer the 2020. However, we're gonna listen to the 2014. I'm not gonna cry. I cry in a minute. In a minute, but I'm not gonna cry. And we're gonna be good. I'm not gonna cry. It still kind of sounds like it's a live situation from here. This is from The Music of George Harrison by Thomas McFarlane. During his years with the Beatles, Harrison had generated an enormous backlog of material. Producer Phil Spector was amazed by the amount of quality material that George had on hand. This is in the Living in the Material World documentary, so I'll add it in here if I can, or parts of it in here.
To George's Friar Park, which he had just purchased, and he said, I have a few ditties for you to hear. It was endless. He had literally hundreds of songs, and each one was better than the rest. He had all this emotion built up when it released to me. I don't think he had played them to anybody, maybe Patty.
This song is so good. It hurts my body. It hurts my body how good this song is. What am I supposed to do with myself? How am I supposed to not cry?
Help me. Well, first we're gonna chop off those little dookies.
The power I could bring to your life with just snip.
I went to George's Friar Park, which he had just purchased, and he said, I have a few ditties for you to hear. It was endless. He had literally hundreds of songs, and each one was better than the rest. He let me make all the basic tracks. He said, go, go, go. He would play, and then he would come back and listen. In the overdubbing, he was in control of his parts. He wouldn't let anything go until it was right. That's what made the Beatles records, those solos. They were so commercial and so technically perfect. That was George's gift. George is one of the most commercial musicians and songwriters and quintessential players I've ever known in my entire career. Fuck me. Fuck me. Jesus. Not like that. Not like that. Not like that. That's not how we do things here.
Yeah.
If I was his friend right now, they'd be like, I love Elle. I'd be like, all right, if you're going to tell her, let's get you a haircut.
Here's the music of George Harrison by Thomas McFarlane. McFarlane talks here about the All Things Must Pass remaster. In the first few months of 2000, George returned to the preparation for the anticipated 30th anniversary reissue of All Things Must Pass. He met with Ken Scott to begin the process of reviewing the original tapes. As mentioned in Chapter 4, back in 1970, no one seemed to be keeping close track of who played on what or where. Thus, Scott had to take some hunting down the original masters for several of the songs. They were delighted to be working together again. But there were several matters, both pleasant and unpleasant, that neither had anticipated, as Scott points out. Now I must explain the first time that George and I sat behind his board and we started to listen to a song from the original album. We just turned to each other and burst out laughing. Here we were, almost 40 years on, sitting in the same positions and listening to exactly the same recording. It was just so absolutely bizarre that it took a while for the laughter to subside, but once it did, we were in complete agreement about one tiny little thing. What's with all the reverb? The reverb, of course, had been the trademark of Phil Spector, who co-produced the original album with George back in 1970. At the time, it had been one of the album's key features. 30 years on, it sounded dated and decidedly overdone. In describing the first session for the song Wah Wah, George himself had expressed a certain amount of discomfort with Spector's heavily reverbed approach. He described how the song initially sounded really nice in studio, all this nice acoustics and piano and no echo on anything. We went in to listen to it and I thought, I hate it, it's so horrible, but I grew to like it. Now they were considering reworking the material to get a drier, more realistic sound. It didn't happen, but should they have done so? This is one of those songs that, oh, Lars, come on, get it together. Stop crying. Nobody wants to hear you cry. Somebody out there wants to see me cry. I know that at least one of you, at least there has to be somebody who has a crying fetish. Fine, I would rather you have a Beatles fetish, but like some person, there's one person that has a crying fetish, and I'm coming to terms with it. This study began with a quote from George regarding the distinctive qualities of any recorded work. There, he stressed an interplay between the various technological elements that contributed to a work's impact. In that light, any modifications to the original mix of All Things Must Pass would arguably diminish the album's power as a document of its time. There was a slight reshuffling of the Apple Jam disc in order to place Out of the Blue at the end of the sequence. Otherwise, the new version stayed true to the original. I know that by the time he was recording this, mastering it, the level of the harshness of the feelings between him and the other Beatles, well, no, not between him and Paul. Like, things were still really bad and would be for like well over a decade. The wounds were not ripped wide open. The thing about it is that I know he's still trying to find a way to evoke that emotion and explain it in the booth and through his instruments, his vocal instrument, you know, as well. Brace yourself, I'm about to freaking lose it. Like, it's so annoying because I don't go in here. Well, I do know that I'm gonna cry. Like, I'm aware of that sometimes. With the White Album, it was like, it's a lost cause. But I try not, every single time I try not to. Like, I'm always like, that reaction of like, oh my God, like, it's because I want to sound eloquent when I talk. But anyway, brace yourself because I'm about to freaking lose it. What really sucks, holy crap, why, stop, oh my God. What really sucks, what time is it? 5:23 in the morning. Stop, my neighbors hate me. I would not put it past Paul to have actually said that, to say, I made you a big star. You were there at the right time and you were cheap as fuck. And you gotta wonder, like, George was fine, right into the NME. Find a session guitarist to replace me. Where did he get such a fucking notion? Right into the NME. Find a session guitarist to replace me. Where did he get such a fucking notion? Stop. Did he hear that from Paul himself? Because Paul was going around telling people, you're no good. We're hearing that from multiple places, talking about 1968 and 69. It is literally something that Paul was saying to people. Where would he get that notion? You made me such a big star. I was just there at the right time. I don't think that that was something that he intuited himself. I think it's something he heard. And that's hard because I spent a good chunk of this video defending Paul. I won't forget the very real possibility that he said something like that, though, because he said lots of things just like it. This song is talking about something extremely difficult and something that is a highly unpalatable situation for the listener. What do you mean the Beatles hate each other? You know, and yet he's like, no, this is a groovy song.
I was just thinking actually about my song, And I Love Her. I give her all my love. I had that. But then George comes in with do-do-do-do. Now you think about that, that's the song. You know, but he made that up on the session. Because he knew the chords and he just said, well, you know, we said it needs a riff. I didn't write that.
Now we're nitpicking here. In my time filming before this, I have to say it now. And I still agree with myself. This is something I agree with or else I wouldn't be saying it now. Dog, you can just be mad. You don't need to make it a spiritual thing. You don't need to write your lesson now. It doesn't need to be, and now I know how life can be if I keep myself free. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. Dude, it's fine. You can just be pissed. It's okay. You don't need to bring it all the way around and make it some good, beautiful Buddhist moment. It's okay to be just mad. I felt like I still feel like, does it really fit in this song? Because I don't feel like it really fits. That's just me though. But I would keep it in because there needs to be something there. The piece needs to be there, but the wording or the message, I don't know. I'm like, I think you're lying. I don't think you're always lying, but right now, I think you want to be enlightened. I don't think that you're ready to be. I think you're still pissed, and it's okay to be pissed. If I haven't mentioned it before, this part is so fucking insane. You don't see me crying. You don't hear me sighing. It's not, you won't see me crying. You won't hear me sighing. It's not, you will not ever see me cry over this. You will not ever hear me sigh over this. It's you don't. You aren't hearing me. Regardless of all of this posturing that I've done about how this song could be about the Beatles and the Beatles situation at large, that's not about the Beatles, that's about Paul McCartney. You aren't seeing me. You literally, I'm here saying, yes, well, I don't mind. I'll play whatever you want me to play. Or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. Whatever it is that will please you, I'll do it. But I don't think you know what that one is. You aren't hearing me. That sucks. It is kind of funny because it does sound a little bit like your brain on an all-nighter. And you're just a little sleep deprived and your emotions are raw, 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 raw. I tried to look into more information on that engine going. Is that like a certain thing? I didn't find any extra information except for the fact that it just feels like he's saying, I'm out of here. Peace. See you around the clubs.
How do you and Paul get on?
We get on very well.
George?
Yeah, no, we do actually. More recently, we've been hanging out and getting to know each other, going for dinner. And it's absolutely not true what they said in the News of the World last Sunday. Somebody, actually, I was in San Remo the day before Paul arrived, and I got a phone call from somebody, the Daily Mail phoned up. And they said, well, there's some people down here who are trying to get this rumor started about you and Paul. The reason why we weren't there together was because we didn't even know each other was going to be there anyway, and we all there on different days. But it's definitely just one of those things that these people sit around and think, let's have a fight between, you know, George and Paul now, you know. But actually, I love Paul, he's my mate, and it doesn't matter what they say in the papers, it's not going to, they're not going to get much mileage out of that one.
We have not touched the stars, nor are we forgotten, which brings us back to the hero's shoulders and the gentleness that comes, not from the absence of violence, but despite the abundance of it. Richard Sykin. On the 15th of February, 2001, George Harrison did a web chat for Yahoo and MSN. Spongeweed70508 asked, "Does Paul still piss you off? Tell us the truth." And George responded, "Scan not a friend with a microscopic glass. You know his faults, then let his foibles pass." Old Victorian proverb. I'm sure there's enough about me that pisses him off, but I think we have now grown old enough to realize that we're both pretty damn cute. Before I read this real quick, when I say 4 old men, I mean all 4 of them. Please don't be weird about John and George's ages. Their spirit lives on with us, and I like to prefer to think of them as 4 old men rather than, one that died only 6 years older than I am now, okay? So don't be a fucking weirdo. Just I wrote this, I meant it from my soul. Let me have it, thank you. Don't be weird. I'm just thinking because it's one of those days, and so I just thought I would film some thoughts. In Patty's biography, she says that she didn't think that George and Paul loved each other. And I posted something on my Instagram story the other day. You say that they didn't love each other. Not you, Patty, but the world, that they just hated each other. You say that they didn't love each other at all, but I think that they loved each other too much. George Harrison hated Paul McCartney, and Paul McCartney deserved it. But he didn't. And he didn't. Hate is not immutable, immovable, a moment frozen in time where reality stops and myth begins. Animosity fades, amends are made, and once what was inflexible, sacrosanct, is no longer. A video I always wanted to make, as in a conversation I always want to have. The puzzle that plagues too many sleepless nights for a person who has read too many books on 4 old men. I pored over the white-hot, insufferable, and inaccurate diatribes written by Philip Norman, positing McCartney, a devil, Lennon, a martyr, Harrison, an afterthought, Starr, a footnote. I don't quote him. But I had to remind myself of it all. The world read his lunatic rantings in 1981, a mere wrinkle in Beatles writings that set the pace for the assumptions held even now. Harrison hated McCartney. McCartney deserved it. But he didn't. And he didn't. To be fair, did he deserve the hate/animosity that came from George Harrison? Yeah, he did. Did Paul McCartney deserve the long-lasting lambasting of his reputation that continues, once again, to this day? No. This story is rehashed, it's recited, but hardly re-examined, in spite of both parties admitting faults and unfavorable feelings coming to a resolution. There were afternoons spent walking the Friar Park grounds, dinners, drinks, 4 hours holding hands shortly before George's death. The significance of what is left out of this story itself should be examined. Why are we so set on keeping this as truth? I pulled a dozen new George books and dog-eared them all. I found most of them to be selective in their memories. Harrison hated McCartney. McCartney deserved it. He didn't, and he didn't. Leng did okay, Shapiro did not. Greene, Jackson, Inglis, Clayson, McFarlane, all with merits. Some beautiful writers. Shapiro left me in a chokehold. Publication dates can grant some leniency for them, depending on how hard they work to find those first-person interviews and sourcing. We can see the framing and why it might be that way. I worry about the fans who have only read one of them. Harrison hated McCartney. McCartney deserved it. He didn't, and he didn't. I have hope for the fans who listened and listened intently. You've given me a wah-wah, original lyrics, so I'm thinking of you and the different things I must do. But if it's not love that you need, then I'll try my best to make everything succeed. Tell me, what is my life without your love? Who am I without you by my side? Hanging above my head this entire time has been this Kafka quote, "All the love in the world is useless when there is a total lack of understanding." And I think about this immortal quote from Jeff Emmerich, perhaps my favorite non-Beatle quote. Interestingly, all the bad feelings of the past weeks seemed to evaporate as soon as they gathered around the mic and I fed tape echo into their headphones. That's all it took for them to suspend their petty disagreements. For those few moments, they would clown around and act silly again, like they did when they were kids just starting out. Then as soon as they'd take the cans off, they'd go back to hating each other. It was very odd. It was almost as if having the headphones on and hearing that echo put them in a dreamlike state. What a conundrum it must have been to be in Twickenham. No cans, no echo, no Jeff. A dozen cameras, a deadline, and a total lack of understanding. I wept before I put on my makeup today, wondering about fans not forgiving 4 old men and what that means for the likelihood of me being able to forgive my father and what that means for the likelihood of anyone being able to forgive anyone. Harrison hated McCartney. McCartney deserved it. He didn't. And he didn't.
My sweet Lord. My Lord. My Lord. But it takes so long, my Lord. My sweet Lord.
Just a quick shout out to my gold passport holders. James D, Julian, Pete S, Pete L, Jody, Al, CB, Venus, Steve F, Caleb, Ann, Kyle, Shitpost Botman, Ashley, Taylor, Iridescent Gems, Russell, Matthew B, W, Tyler S, Angel, Front Penny, Debesh, Tim, VT, Felonious Punk, Dan, Angie Lee, Peter R, Pam, Christopher R, Joe M, and Swag Pacman 64. Thank you so much for getting your gold passport and tolerating my insanity.